Welcome back to Cosmic Wand, where the what-ifs get gloriously out of hand. Today's adventure: the Addams family adopted Harry and Wednesday swore to end anyone who touched him. Before we begin, do smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so a new story never slips past you in the dark. Settle in. Now let's begin. Chapter 1: The Finding Privet Drive did not approve of the hearse. It was a long, black, well-kept hearse, and it had been parked with what the residents would later describe to one another as deliberate contempt, straddling the boundary between number 4 and number 6 so that neither household could claim the offense as strictly their own. The engine ticked as it cooled. A curtain of some heavy, moth-colored fabric had been hung inside the rear windows, and behind it something occasionally shifted its weight. On the bonnet, a hood ornament in the shape of a small bronze gargoyle regarded the identical houses, the identical hedges, and the identical square lawns with the expression of a creature who had seen a great deal and been disappointed by most of it. The Addams family were on holiday, which for the Addamses meant touring the parts of England most calculated to horrify them, and nothing in the whole grim island had horrified them so thoroughly as Surrey. They had come for the tombs and the fog and the moors, and had detoured on Gomez's insistence through the commuter belt, and there they had discovered a species of horror the family had not known existed, which was the horror of relentless pleasantness. Morticia had grown quieter and quieter as the hedges grew squarer. Gomez had begun to twitch at the sight of a hanging basket. Little Whinging, with its matched cars and its washed windows and its dreadful municipal cheer, had struck the whole family as the single most unnerving place they had ever visited, a town so committed to appearing content that something, they all agreed, must be very badly wrong underneath it, because that much surface only ever grew over a wound. They had parked to investigate. They were connoisseurs of wounds. Number 4, Privet Drive, was proud to be the most normal house on the most normal street in the whole of Surrey, and it had worked at this the way other families worked at loving one another. The lawn was cut to a uniform bristle. The car was washed on Sundays. The curtains matched. Vernon Dursley had once won a small plastic trophy at the office for a presentation on quarterly drill bit forecasts, and it stood on the mantel where a photograph of a nephew might have stood in a different sort of house. There was a nephew. He was in the garden. Harry knelt at the edge of the flower bed with a trowel too big for his hand, prizing up weeds that had done nothing to anybody, and he watched the hearse from under his fringe sideways without seeming to, which was how he watched most things. He had learned early that looking directly at a thing brought it to your door. He was 8 years old and small for it, and he wore a jumper that had belonged to Dudley and would have fit 3 of him. The cuffs rolled into fat donuts at his wrists. It was October and his breath smoked. His fingers had gone the pale, chapped white of scrubbed potatoes, and he flexed them once quietly and kept working, because Aunt Petunia was at the kitchen window with the particular stillness of a woman waiting to be given a reason. Across the fence, in the tidy hush of Little Whinging, a girl was standing on the pavement looking at him. She had 2 black plaits, precise as plumb lines, and a black dress with a white collar, and shoes that had been polished to the shine of wet slate. She held herself with the posture of someone attending her own funeral and finding the service adequate. She did not smile, she did not fidget. She looked at Harry, and then she looked at the kitchen window, and then she looked at Harry again, and she came to some private arithmetic and appeared to enter it in a ledger no one else could see. "You missed one," she said. Harry followed her gaze. A dandelion had gone to seed near his knee, a gray ghost of itself. "I'm leaving that one," he said. "It's not hurting anyone. Nothing that lives is not hurting someone," said the girl. "That is the definition of living." She considered the dandelion with a connoisseur's respect. "But I approve of the mercy. Mercy is a kind of leash. You keep it in your pocket and produce it when you want the other person to feel your hand." Harry did not know what to make of any of this, and so he did the thing he always did, which was to make himself smaller and wait for the strangeness to pass over him like weather. It did not pass. The girl stepped up to the low fence and put both hands flat upon it, and she leaned very slightly forward, and she studied his wrists where the 2 big cuffs had rolled back. "Who did that?" she said. It was not a question. It had the shape of a question and none of the softness. Harry pulled the cuffs down over the bruises with the reflex of long practice. "I fell. You did not fall. You were pushed, or you were held, or you were struck. I have catalogued 41 varieties of bruise, and I am composing a monograph." She tilted her head a precise number of degrees. "That one is a grip, 4 fingers, an adult, or a large child with adult malice." She produced from somewhere about the black dress a small notebook bound in what he sincerely hoped was leather, and a pencil worn to a stub. "You may tell me the name. I keep records." "What for?" "So that later," said the girl, "when it matters, I will not have to guess." His name was Harry Potter, and the world had decided he was not worth wanting, and he had believed it because it was the only thing anyone had told him consistently. He lived in the cupboard under the stairs, which had a mattress and a spider named Gwendolen, whom he had not named aloud in case naming her got her killed. He had a light that was a bare bulb on a string, and when the family walked overhead the dust came down in slow drifts and he would lie on his back and watch it fall through the yellow light and pretend it was something else, snow or ash or stars, whatever he needed that night. He had learned to cook eggs before he could reliably tie his shoes. He had learned that the safest place in any room was the place where no one was looking, and that the second safest place was underneath the first. He was called the freak in that house, and boy when they were feeling generous, and you when they were not. He had not been called Harry by an adult in memory. His birthday was noted the way one notes an unpaid invoice. When strange things happened around him, and strange things did happen, glass mending, hair regrowing overnight after Aunt Petunia had shorn it to the scalp, a jumper shrinking off him and away in the wash so it could not choke him, the family treated each event as a personal insult he had arranged specifically to ruin their afternoon. He had stopped trying to explain that he did not know how he did it. Explaining was a door, and doors brought things to you. That afternoon he had been sent out to weed because Dudley's gang was coming, and Dudley's gang had a game they played called Harry Hunting, which had rules the way weather has rules, which is to say that everyone agreed afterward what had happened and no one could have stopped it. Harry Hunting worked best when Harry was outdoors and alone and had nowhere to be that anyone would miss him from. So Aunt Petunia had put the trowel in his hand and the whole open afternoon around him like a snare, and had gone to stand at the window to make sure he understood the arrangement. He understood the arrangement. He had understood arrangements like it his whole life. What he had not understood, until the girl with the plates leaned on the fence and asked for a name so she would not have to guess, was that there existed people in the world who kept a ledger on the other side of the account. Dudley's gang came around the corner at 3:30, 5 of them, wide and loud and pleased with themselves, and Harry did the sensible thing, which was to be already gone. He went over the back fence and through the number 6 garden and into the strip of ornamental hydrangeas that ran along the side wall, and he folded himself into the blue shadow of the flowers and made himself into a stone. He had done it 100 times. He was very good at it. He could go somewhere behind his own eyes and wait, and his pulse would slow, and the shouting would wash past, and eventually it would be safe. The shouting came. Piers Palkus's reedy call and Dudley's heavy one, and the flat slap of trainers on pavement, quartering the gardens. Harry closed his eyes and became a stone. When he opened them, the girl was crouched in the hydrangeas beside him, having arrived without disturbing a single leaf, and she was watching him with the frank interest of a naturalist who has found a specimen thought extinct. "They hunt you," she observed, "in a pack. That is inefficient. A pack telegraphs itself. If I wanted you," she said, "you would not hear me coming, and you would not know it had happened until you noticed the temperature of the room had changed." She said it the way another child might say she supported a football club. "I am Wednesday, like the day, like the child of woe. My mother has a poem." Wednesday parted 2 leaves with one finger and looked out at the gardens, where Dudley's gang was blundering through number 8's compost with the confidence of the never punished. Her expression did not change, but something behind it took a measurement. The fat one leads. The small, reedy one wants to be liked by the fat one, which makes him the most dangerous because he has something to prove and no talent to prove it with. The other 3 are furniture. She withdrew her finger and let the leaves close. Furniture does what the room does. You worked all that out just now. I work everyone out. It is a hobby like taxidermy. She turned the full weight of her attention on him, and it was a heavy thing, that attention, but it did not press down on him the way attention usually did. It held him up. "I have been in this county for 2 days, and I have wanted to leave for 2 days. Everything is clean and nothing is true. And then I came around a corner and there was a small person weeding a garden in the cold in a jumper for a person 3 times his size, being watched from a window by a woman who was waiting, and I thought." Wednesday paused with the precision of a woman laying a single card face up. "I thought there, that is the only true thing in Surrey. That is worth crossing a county for." Harry did not know what to say to being called the only true thing in Surrey. No one had ever suggested he was worth crossing a street for. He looked down at the trowel he was still, absurdly, holding, and he set it in the dirt very carefully so it would not make a sound. "They'll find me eventually," he said, because it was true, and he preferred people knew the true thing before they decided how much of him to invest in. "They always do. It's better if I just let them. It's over quicker." "Who taught you that?" Wednesday said. "Nobody taught me. I worked it out." "Someone taught you. You do not work out a sentence like that on your own at 8. Someone stood over you enough times that the lesson set, the way a bone sets crooked if no one puts it right." She looked at him with the clinical tenderness of a physician reading an old break. "I am going to tell you the correct version, and you are going to carry it around instead, and one day it will feel true, which is all truth ever is, a thing you have carried long enough to fit your hand. The correct version is this: it is not over quicker when you let them. It is over quicker when someone else decides that it will never happen to you again, and arranges the world so that it does not. That someone is usually oneself. Occasionally," she allowed with the air of a monarch conferring a duchy, "it is a person who finds you in a bush." She reached out and without any particular ceremony brushed a crushed hydrangea petal from his hair, which no one had done for him in the whole of his living memory, and the smallness of it undid something in his chest he had spent years bolting shut. Wednesday considered him the way a chess player considers a board that has been played badly for 11 moves. No, she said, it is not better, it is only faster. Those are different, and the difference is the whole of everything. She rose in one motion without using her hands, and she held one out to him, small and cold and absolutely steady. Get up, you are done letting them. What happened next entered Little Whinging folklore, though no one who told it ever agreed on the details, because the details did not hold still. Dudley's gang cornered them by the garden wall, or believed they did. 5 boys, red-faced and grinning, arranged in the loose crescent that predators use and cowards imitate. Dudley put his fists on his hips and did the pig-eyed thing he did before he enjoyed himself, and Piers giggled the giggle that meant he had decided he was safe. Who's the girl? Said Dudley. She your girlfriend, freak. She dead. She looks dead. I have been told I have excellent color, said Wednesday, for a corpse. She stepped in front of Harry, not protectively exactly, but the way a chess piece steps in front of a king, occupying a square that changes what the whole board is permitted to do. She looked up at Dudley, who had 4 stone on her and a foot of height, and she looked at him the way you look at a specimen you have decided not to preserve because it is not interesting enough. You are Dudley. You lead because you are large and the others are frightened. That is not leadership. That is furniture arrangement. I have a brother larger than you who once fell into a thrashing machine as an experiment, and he apologized to the machine. She let that settle. Do you know what a thrashing machine does? Piers's giggle developed a hitch in it. I am going to say some things, Wednesday continued, in the mild tone of a woman reading a shopping list, and you are going to feel them arrive one at a time. You hurt this person because hurting is the only thing you are good at, and being good at one thing is the whole of your personality. And someday you will meet a person who is good at that thing too, and better, and on that day you will understand at last what your victims understood, which is that the world contains rooms you cannot leave. She had not raised her voice, she had not blinked. I am not that person. I am an 11-year-old girl in a dress. But I keep a book, and she produced the small, dreadful notebook and opened it to a page and turned it toward him, and whatever Dudley saw written there, and it may have been nothing, it may have been a list of his own habits observed across a single afternoon. The color went out of his face like water out of a cracked glass. And you are in it now, you are all in it now, furniture and all. There was a silence in the garden of the particular quality that follows the click of something locking. And then from the pavement beyond the wall, a voice like warm brandy poured over gravel said, Cara mia, you've made friends, and a man vaulted the wall without appearing to touch it, landing in the flower bed in a pinstriped suit with a rose in the buttonhole and a lit cigar clenched in a grin that took up most of his face. He was slim and dark and vivid, and he moved as though gravity were a delightful old adversary he beat regularly at cards. He looked at the 5 boys and he looked at Harry, and something in his brilliant face went, for just a moment, very still and very old, and then blazed up again brighter than before. And who, said Gomez Addams, spreading his arms wide enough to embrace the entire dismal county, is this magnificent young man? Dudley's gang did what stampeding furniture does. They went. The adults arrived the way weather systems arrive, which is to say all at once and from directions you had not been watching. The woman came last and slowest, and she made the fastest thing in the garden seem to be standing still. She was tall and pale and dressed in black that clung and pooled, and she walked as though the ground were grateful, and around her the very cold of the October afternoon seemed to arrange itself into something more comfortable, the way a cat rearranges a lap. She stopped at the edge of the flower bed and looked down at Harry with dark, unhurried eyes, and Harry, who had spent his whole life learning the precise geometry of an adult about to be disappointed in him, found none of that geometry in her face. He did not know what to do with its absence. It was like reaching for a stare that was not there. Gomez, said Morticia Addams, he has his mother's eyes. Someone loved this child once, and then the loving stopped, and no one told him it was allowed to start again. She crouched, which she did the way water finds a lower place, without hurry and without effort, until her face was level with his. What is your name, little one? Harry, he said. And then, because honesty had been the only currency he was ever allowed to keep, they call me Freak mostly, and boy. Something moved across Morticia's face that did not disturb its surface, the way a large thing moves under still water. Beside her, Gomez went very quiet, and the cigar burned unattended, and Wednesday, who had returned her notebook to its unseen pocket, wrote something in the air with one finger. A single mark entered in the ledger. They call you those things, Morticia repeated, tasting the words and finding them spoiled. How interesting. In our family, we believe that a name is the first grave you dig for a person, and that you must dig it with love or not at all. She reached out slowly so he could see it coming and refuse it, and when he did not refuse it, she tucked a strand of his hair, the black cowlicked mess of it, behind his ear over the thin white line of the scar there. Her fingers were cold and certain. Harry, she said, and set the word down between them like a jewel on velvet. That is a good name, short. It's the mouth like a knife fits a sheath. We shall keep it. Keep it, Harry repeated. He did not understand. He understood so little of what was happening that he had stopped trying and had begun simply to let it happen to him, which was, he would realize much later, the first thing he had ever let happen to himself on purpose. "Where's your mother, Harry?" Morticia asked. "Your father, dead. There was a car crash." He recited it. It was the family's story, and he had never had another. "My parents were drunks and they died in a car crash and I got the scar. I live with my aunt and uncle, number 4. At the word drunks, Gomez made a sound low in his chest that was not a word. Morticia did not look away from Harry. "Do you believe that?" she said. "The car crash?" And Harry, who had never once been asked whether he believed the thing he had been given to believe, opened his mouth to say yes, of course it's true, and discovered that he could not, that the yes would not form, that some small, stubborn animal at the center of him had been waiting his entire life for exactly this permission and had just now taken it. "No," he said. It came out very quietly. I don't know why. The scar doesn't feel like a car crash. It feels like something looked at me." For a moment no one in the garden said anything at all. A hand, a single pale disembodied hand with a signet ring, crept up over the top of the wall, patted the brick twice in what was unmistakably approval, and withdrew. Then Morticia rose, and she looked at the house at number 4, at its scrubbed step and its matched curtains and its trophy-lit mantle just visible through the glass, and her face was as serene as a lake before the thing beneath it decides to surface. "Gomez," she said. "I should like to meet the people who taught a child to call himself a freak. I should like to meet them very much." Gomez's grin returned like a struck match. "Tish," he breathed, "when you're murderous you speak French." "I said nothing in French, mon amour." "You will," he said, and kissed the length of her arm from wrist to elbow, and offered it, and together the Addamses turned toward number 4 Privet Drive, with the unhurried inevitability of a tide coming in over people who have built their sandcastles below the line and called it a nation. Aunt Petunia opened the door on the chain and looked out through the gap with the face of a woman who has heard the word inspection. "We don't want any," she said, "whatever it is," and began to close the door and found that she could not, because a hand had appeared in the gap, not attached to anything, just a hand resting its fingertips lightly against the door, applying no visible force and yet holding it precisely where it was, the signet ring winking. Petunia looked at the hand. She made a sound like a kettle, deciding whether to be a kettle. "Thing," said Morticia gently, "don't frighten her before we've been introduced. Manners cost nothing and buy everything." The hand withdrew, gave Petunia a small courteous wave, and vanished into a sleeve that was not there. "Good afternoon, my name is Morticia Addams. This is my husband, Gomez. We have come about the child." "There's no one here by that description," Petunia began, and Vernon's bulk arrived behind her, filling the hall like a cork filling a bottle, purpling already, working himself up the ladder of his own outrage rung by rung. "Now see here," Vernon said. "I don't know who you people think you are, parking that ruddy great funeral wagon across a decent street, frightening the neighbors, but this is a respectable house and we don't want any trouble, and we certainly don't want—" "You have a child in a cupboard," said Wednesday. She had not raised her voice. She had simply spoken from where she stood on the step beside Harry with her hand not quite touching his shoulder, and the words went into the hall and stopped Vernon Dursley the way a pin stops a moth. He had not heard a child say a sentence like that before in that tone, without heat, a fact laid on a table for examination. "He sleeps in the cupboard under your stairs," Wednesday continued. "I can see the vent from here. It has been kicked from the inside low down where a small person's foot would reach if they were frightened in the dark and forgot for a moment that no one was coming. There are 4 locks on the outside of that cupboard door and none on the inside. You have a nice house. You built the nice house on top of him like a paving stone. I find it," she said, and here at last something entered her voice, something cold and level and terrible in its patience, instructive. Vernon's mouth opened and closed. Petunia had gone the gray of old dishwater. "He's not," Vernon started. "It's not like that. He's disturbed, he tells lies, he's a freak, he's always been a—" Gomez Addams was suddenly very close to the door, and he had not appeared to move to get there, and the cigar was gone and both his hands were loose and easy at his sides in a manner that a certain kind of man recognizes in another and grows quiet around. He was still smiling. That was the extraordinary thing. He was smiling with tremendous warmth. "Say it again," said Gomez pleasantly. "The word. I want to hear it in your voice in your hall over your matched carpets so that I understand precisely what has been happening here and precisely what sort of afternoon we are all about to have. Go on, amigo." He tilted his head. "Freak, say it to me." Vernon did not say it. Some ancient survival instinct, the same one that had kept his ancestors out of the caves where the eyes were, told him not to say it. "I thought not," said Gomez, and the warmth in him was the warmth of a furnace with the door standing open, and it was the most frightening thing Harry had ever stood next to, and it was, gloriously, entirely on his side. "Here is what will happen. My wife is going to ask you a question, and you are going to answer it honestly, because you have spent your whole life being frightened of the wrong things, and you have just now at last met the right one." Morticia stepped forward. She looked at Petunia, and something passed between the two women that had nothing to do with the men, a recognition and a rejection, the acknowledgement of one who had known Lily and thrown her away meeting one who could smell a thrown-away thing at 40 paces. You are his aunt, Morticia said, his blood, and you looked at your sister's orphan, this small, clever, grieving child, and you put him in a cupboard and taught him a word to call himself so he would do the cruelty for you and save you the trouble. She said it without heat, which was worse than heat, the way a coroner reads a cause of death. I am not going to hurt you, Petunia Dursley. That is not our way, whatever you have decided about us from the shape of our car. We do not need to hurt you, we are simply going to take him. And you are going to let us gladly with a smile, and you are going to sign whatever is put in front of you, and you are going to feel, underneath your relief, for the rest of your ordinary life, the specific cold that is the knowledge that a stranger loved your nephew on sight in a garden, in the time it took you to fail to do it in 8 years. You can't just, Vernon rallied, groping for the solid ground of officialdom. There are procedures, there's paperwork, there's the council. You can't take a child off a doorstep like a parcel. We can, actually, said a new voice. Grandmama had come up the path unnoticed, which she did professionally, a small, stooped ancient woman with a shawl and a carpet-bag and an expression of profound commercial cheer. She set the carpet-bag on the step and opened it and produced a sheaf of documents, some of them on paper and some of them on things that were not quite paper, and a fountain pen that smoked faintly, and she beamed up at Vernon with a mouthful of teeth that were doing their best. Guardianship transfer, dearie, she said. All in order. Council stamp, notary the lot. I do a beautiful notary. Sign at the crosses and don't read the small print. Nobody ever reads the small print. That's where I keep the interesting bits. She winked. It was a terrible wink. You want him gone. We want him kept. It's the only transaction in the history of the world where everybody wins and only one party knows it. Sign love, or she let the or hang there, benevolent, patient, a spider with a pension. Or we can do it the slow way, and I do so enjoy the slow way. I've got all the time that's left. Vernon Dursley looked at the smoking pen. He looked at the disembodied hand which had reappeared to hold the papers flat against the doorframe with the air of a helpful clerk. He looked at his wife, who was not looking at anyone, who was looking at the middle distance where her dead sister's eyes had been living in a small face for 8 years while she pretended not to see them. He signed at all the crosses. He signed quickly, the way you pull off a plaster, the way you get rid of a thing you have decided to be glad to be rid of because the alternative is to know what you are. Petunia signed under her own name in a hand that shook. Grandmama blotted each signature with a square of black silk and packed the papers away and snapped the carpet-bag shut with the satisfaction of a woman who has closed a deal she has been trying to close her whole life. Lovely doing business, she said. Harry dear, is there anything in the house you want, anything at all? Say the word and I'll fetch it, and if they object I'll fetch it harder. Harry stood on the step of number 4 Privet Drive and looked back into the hall where he had lived for 8 years under the stairs and thought about what he owned. He owned nothing. He had been careful never to own anything because owning a thing meant it could be taken, and he had learned to take himself away first ahead of the theft so that it would not be a theft when it came, only a formality. No, he said, there's nothing in there that's mine. And Morticia Addams, who had heard the whole of a life in that sentence, held out her hand. They walked back down the path in the failing light, all of them, the strangest procession Privet Drive had ever pretended not to watch through its net curtains. Gomez, who had produced the cigar again from nowhere, striding and gesturing and already narrating Harry's glorious future in 3 languages. Grandmama cackling to herself over the paperwork. Morticia gliding one cold hand around Harry's small chapped one, saying nothing, which was its own kind of saying. Thing riding on Harry's shoulder now, having climbed there without asking and stayed because Harry had not brushed him off, tapping out a rhythm against Harry's collarbone that felt, absurdly, like being told everything was going to be all right in a language made entirely of patience. And Wednesday, walking a half step behind Harry's other shoulder, watching the street, watching the windows, watching the gardens and the hedges and the parked cars and the mouths of the passages between the houses, the manner of a general leaving a country she does not intend to leave undefended behind her. At the gate she stopped. Harry stopped too because she had and looked back with her at number 4 at its scrubbed step and its winking trophy and its 4 locks on a cupboard that would, from tonight, stand empty for the rest of its life. I want to tell you something, Wednesday said, and I want you to understand that I do not say things I do not mean because I find that meaning things is the only reason to bother speaking, and most people speak the way pigeons fly in a panic at random into windows. She turned from the house and looked at him, and her face was as still and pale and serious as a headstone, and it was, he understood, a promise she was carving. You have lived your whole life in a place where no one would come when you called. That is over. It ended in a hydrangea bush this afternoon, and it is not going to start again. I have a book, and I have decided, and neither of those things ever unmakes itself. Anyone who touches you now, anyone who lays a hand on you or a word or a plan, anyone who so much as decides you are a thing that can be moved without your leave is going to meet me. She said it the way other people say the three ordinary important words, which is to say badly and completely and once. And I am going to end them, not quickly, not mercifully. I am going to end them the way you end a sentence, so that everyone who reads it after knows exactly where it stopped and why. Harry looked at this fierce, small, strange girl who had crossed a county and found him in the cold and put herself between him and the whole practiced machinery of his misery. And he did the thing he had not done in front of another person in longer than he could remember, the thing the cupboard had trained out of him, the thing that made him, for one unguarded instant, exactly the 8-year-old he had never been allowed to be. He smiled. It was not a large smile. It had years of disuse in it, and it did not quite know where to sit on his face. But it was real, and it was aimed at her, and Wednesday Addams received it with the grave attention she gave all rare specimens, and put it away somewhere cold and permanent with the other few things she had decided to keep forever, and did not smile back because she never would, but reached out instead and straightened the rolled cuff of his enormous jumper, once with 2 fingers, a gesture that in the whole of the Addams vocabulary of affection meant precisely and only, mine now and safe. The hearse's engine turned over. Somewhere inside, behind the moth-colored curtains, a lion yawned. Lurch at the wheel groaned a welcome that shook the windows in a manner Harry would come to find deeply comforting. "Come along, little one," said Morticia, and opened the door onto a darkness that smelled of candle smoke and old roses and faintly gunpowder, and was, from the first breath of it, more like home than anything Harry had breathed in 8 years. "You have a great deal of family to meet, and they have been waiting for you longer than you know." Harry Potter climbed into the hearse of a family of monsters and let the door close behind him, and out on Privet Drive the streetlights came on one by one over the tidy empty street, illuminating nothing that would ever matter to him again. The inside of the hearse was larger than the outside had any right to promise, upholstered in a deep red velvet gone soft with age, lit by a single candle that stood in a jar on a shelf and did not gutter no matter how the vehicle swayed. It smelled of that candle and of roses, and underneath the roses of something warm and animal. The warm animal turned out to be a lion, an actual lion, drowsing along the length of the back seat with its great head on its paws, and it opened one amber eye at Harry, considered him, and shut it again, having concluded he was acceptable. "That is Kitty Cat," said a round, cheerful child of about 9 who was wedged in beside the lion with an armful of what appeared to be dynamite, though it might in the dimness have been candles. "He only eats things that bore him. You're all right, you're interesting." He extended a slightly grubby hand. "I'm Pugsley, you're Harry. Wednesday sent a message ahead about you, 3 pages. She never sends 3 pages. She once described our entire summer holiday in a word." "What was the word?" Harry asked. "Adequate," said Pugsley with reverence. "So 3 pages is, well, you should know what you're dealing with." Harry sat very carefully on the edge of the velvet, in the small space that had been left for him, which he now understood had been left for him deliberately, between Wednesday and the window, and he kept his hands in his lap and his spine straight and his eyes moving, cataloguing exits, because a lifetime under the stairs does not unlearn itself in a single afternoon in a garden. Wednesday watched him do it. She recognized the accounting. She had done versions of it herself in cheerful hotels among cheerful people, and she approved of it in principle while intending to render it, in his case, unnecessary. She reached into a pocket and produced an object and held it out to him on her flat palm. It was a bookmark, or it was shaped like one, a slim tongue of blackened steel with a worn ribbon threaded through a hole at one end, and its lower edge had been honed to a whisper of brightness. "For you," Wednesday said. "It marks your place in a book. It also opens envelopes and the throats of certain small ideas that are better strangled young. I made it. I make one for people I have decided to keep. I have made 3. She did not elaborate on who held the other 2. "You do not have to thank me. Thanking is for transactions. This is not a transaction." Harry took it. The steel was cold, and then in his hand was not. He turned it over and found, scratched into the flat of it in small, careful letters, a single word, and the word was his name, spelled correctly, which he realized was the first time he had seen it written by a person who had wanted to write it. Up front, Lurch groaned, and the hearse turned off the estate and onto the open road, and Little Whinging began to fall away behind them into its tidy nothing. Morticia, seated across from Harry with her hands folded and the candlelight loving the pale architecture of her face, watched him hold the little steel thing like it might vanish if he set it down. "You may keep your hands out of your lap, little one," she said gently. "No one in this vehicle is keeping count of where they are." She let that sit and did not reach for him and did not press, because she had raised difficult children and buried easy assumptions, and knew that a creature that has been startled its whole life must be allowed to come to the hand in its own time. "And when we arrive, you may eat whatever you like, as much as you like, without asking, and no door in the house will be locked against you ever on either side. I am telling you this now in the dark where you can hear it, so that you have the whole drive to decide whether to believe me. You need not decide tonight." Harry did not say anything. He was not able to say anything. He looked out the window at the streetlights streaming by, and he held the bookmark with his name on it, and beside him Wednesday sat with her hands folded exactly like her mother's, keeping watch on the dark road behind them for anyone who might be following, and finding, to her private satisfaction, that no one was and that no one would dare. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The house that wanted him. The house came out of the fog, the way an idea comes out of a bad night, all at once and already certain of itself. It stood at the top of a hill that had no business being where it was, in a country of gentle green rises, a black iron gate at the foot of a drive, and beyond the gate a mansion of turrets and gables, and one enormous cracked window shaped, if you squinted, like an eye that had given up sleeping. Dead trees lined the drive in a formal procession. A wrought iron fence enclosed a lawn that had been permitted to become a graveyard, and had, with headstones of varying antiquity leaning together in conversational clusters, and Harry, who had spent his life among lawns punished into flatness, looked out the hearse window at a garden that had been allowed to want things, and understood without being told that he had arrived somewhere. The gate opened on its own. It did not creak. Gomez had explained in the car, at length and with feeling, that they had spent a great deal of money getting it to creak, and a great deal more when the creak became too cheerful, and that the current silence had cost them a fortune and was, he felt, the mark of a serious household. Lurch brought the hearse to a stop before the door, and the door was opened from the inside by no one, and then by Lurch, who had somehow already gotten out and come around and up the steps without anyone seeing him leave the driver's seat, and who stood now at his full and considerable height with a candelabra in one hand, looking down at Harry with an expression carved from the side of a mountain. "This is Lurch," said Morticia. "He runs the house. He does not say much, but he says all of it on the piano, and when you have lived here a little while you will find you understand him better than you understand most people who talk." Lurch looked at Harry. Harry looked at Lurch. Something passed between them, small and grave and mutual. Then Lurch inclined his enormous head perhaps 2 degrees, which Harry would learn was from Lurch the equivalent of a long embrace and a promise, and groaned, low and warm, a sound felt in the chest more than heard. "He likes you," Pugsley translated, scrambling down from the hearse with his armload of explosives. That was the good groan. There's a groan for people he'll let live and a groan for people he won't, and that was the first one. Congratulations. Inside, the house breathed cold and welcome. The entrance hall rose 3 stories into shadow, hung with portraits of ancestors who followed Harry with their painted eyes and in 1 or 2 cases with heads that turned. A suit of armor by the stair lifted its visor as he passed and looked out, saw nothing worth killing, and lowered it again. A stuffed something with too many teeth grinned down from over the door. There was a chandelier of antlers and a fire and a hearth big enough to roast a school, and a great curving staircase down which at that moment a hand was descending alone, using the banister for balance, taking the steps at a brisk professional clip. "That is Thing," said Morticia. "You have met. He will want to show you the house himself. He's very proud of the passages." Thing arrived at Harry's feet, considered him from the floor, then climbed his trouser leg and his jumper and installed himself on Harry's shoulder as though a place had been reserved there, and tapped once twice against his collarbone, and Harry, who had spent the drive learning the vocabulary, understood it to mean welcome home, and did not know what to do with the second word, and so held very still and let it be true. They had made him a room. This was the thing that unmade him in the end, more than the lion or the graveyard or the hand on his shoulder. Not a threat, not a wonder. A room. He had never had a room. He had had a cupboard, which is a room the way a cell is a house, and he had had, before he could remember, some other place with a mother's voice in it that he could not reach. And now there was a door at the end of a corridor on the 2nd floor with his name on a small brass plate, Harry, freshly engraved, the metal still bright at the edges of the letters, and behind the door was a room that someone had spent the drive from Surrey making ready for a person they had met that afternoon in a bush. It was a wonderful room. It was, by the standards of the world he had come from, a deeply alarming room, and he loved it on sight with a completeness that frightened him. There was a 4-poster bed hung with black velvet, and Pugsley pointed out with a brother's pride, a working trapdoor beneath it that dropped into a slide that dropped into a pit that was presently empty, but which the family looked forward to furnishing according to Harry's own taste as he developed one. There was a candle in a brass skull on the nightstand that Fester had wired personally, so that it would light itself if Harry woke in the dark and wanted it, and would not on any account set the bed on fire. "Again," said Fester mysteriously, and did not explain. There was a wardrobe that ate moths and asked, in exchange, only to be spoken to politely. There was a window that looked out over the graveyard garden and past it, over the fog and the dead trees to the long grey country beyond, all of it laid out for him like a thing he was allowed to have. And the door did not lock. He checked. He could not help it. It was the first thing his hands did when Morticia had shown him in and stepped back into the corridor to leave him to it. His hands went to the door and found the mechanism and turned it over, looking for the bolt, the hasp, the 4 locks on the outside, the arrangement he had lived inside his whole life. There was a latch on the inside that he could work himself. There was nothing at all on the outside. The door was simply a door, and it belonged to whoever was in the room, and the person in the room was him. "We do not lock doors against people we love," said Morticia from the corridor. She had not come back in. She stood at the threshold with her hands folded, giving him the room the way you give a wild thing a wide berth, and her voice came low and even through the gap. "And we do not lock them in either, which is the more important half, and the half your aunt never learned. You may leave this room at any hour of any night and walk anywhere in this house, and no one will stop you and no one will ask you why. And if you are hungry, the kitchen is always open and Grandmama is always awake, being technically beyond the need for sleep." She let a moment pass. "I am going to leave your door open a hand's width when I go, not because you cannot close it, because I want you to know that an open door is a thing that can simply be in a house without anything coming through it. You may close it whenever you wish. It is yours to close." She left it open a hand's width and went, and Harry stood in the middle of a room that was his in a house that did not lock, and looked at the strip of warm corridor light lying across his floor. And for a long time he did not close the door, because he wanted to see whether she had told the truth, and nothing came through it but the sound of a distant piano and once the polite scuttle of a hand going about its business. And by the time he understood that nothing was going to come through it, he had learned something he would spend years properly believing. Thing came for him an hour later to show him the passages, and it became clear very quickly that the passages were the true house, and the rooms were only the part the house showed to guests. The hand led scuttling ahead along the corridor and pausing at a section of oak paneling to rap 3 times, upon which the panel swung inward on a dark throat of a stair, and Thing gestured Harry through with a courtly flourish and a patience that suggested he had been waiting some while to have someone new to impress. Behind the walls of the Addams mansion ran a second house, narrow and cobwebbed and cold, a warren of stairs that went where no stairs should and corridors that arrived at the backs of portraits, and Thing knew every inch of it and conducted the tour with the pride of a curator who has finally found a visitor worthy of the good exhibits. Here was a peephole behind the eyes of a stern ancestor, through which one could observe the parlor. Here was a chute that dropped, if you were brave, directly into the greenhouse among the plants that bit. Here was a hollow in the wall exactly the size of a small person, lined with a cushion someone had put there long ago, a hiding place built into the bones of the house, and Thing patted it and looked at Harry, and Harry understood that he was being given a bush, a proper one indoors, warm, that belonged to him. "Whose was this?" Harry asked. Thing considered the question, then spelled the answer against Harry's palm, 1 letter at a time, in the finger alphabet he was already teaching without seeming to teach it. WD, and then, after a pause, NOWYOURS, Wednesday's hiding place, given to Harry, which meant, in the economy of this house, that Wednesday had told Thing to give it to him, which meant a thing about Wednesday that she would never say aloud and would deny under any torture the family could devise, and they could devise a great deal. Harry sat in the cushioned hollow in the wall of a house that had built a hiding place into itself and then handed it to him, and Thing sat on his knee, and for a while they simply stayed there in the dark of the walls, listening to the house move around them, and it was the most peaceful Harry had ever been inside 4 walls in his life, because for once the 4 walls were on his side. The kitchen was in the cellar and was the warmest room Harry had ever stood in, which had nothing to do with temperature. It was a low stone vault hung with copper and iron and bundles of drying things that he decided not to identify. A cauldron the size of a bathtub bubbled over a fire, and around it on a stool perched a very old woman with a face like a walnut and eyes like 2 wet black beads, stirring and cackling to herself at intervals in the manner of a person enjoying an excellent private joke. "There he is," said Grandmama without turning around. Come here, let me look at you. My eyes aren't what they were, they're better. I harvested a fresh pair off a barn owl in the spring. Come into the light." Harry came into the light. Grandmama took his chin in one gnarled hand and turned his face this way and that with the brisk, impersonal authority of a woman appraising livestock or diagnosing the dead, and hummed and tutted and pulled down one of his eyelids and peered and pressed a thumb to the pulse at his wrist and counted, and finally released him and sat back with the satisfied air of a mechanic who has found the fault and is looking forward to the invoice. "Underfed," she pronounced. "Underslept, undergrown. Chronically braced, poor mite, wound up like a spring that's forgotten it was ever anything but wound. Malnourished in the body and starved somewhere worse." She reached for a ladle. "None of it permanent, all of it correctable. I've raised worse from further down. Sit, you're making the chair nervous." Harry sat. A bowl arrived in front of him, enormous, filled with something dark and steaming that smelled of iron and herbs and faintly of licorice, and moved a little on its own, and had a single unblinking pale globe floating in the center of it that might have been a boiled onion. "It's watching me," Harry observed. "It's respecting you," said Grandmama. "There's a difference and you'll learn it. Eat around it if it puts you off. Most do the first week. That's real broth, that is, bones and bitterness and 40 years of the same pot never once washed, which is where the flavor lives. Put it in you. You've an appetite in there under all that flinching, and I mean to introduce the 2 of you." Harry looked at the bowl. He realized, ravenous, the deep structural hunger of a child who has learned to be quiet about it, and the smell of the broth had reached down into him and taken hold of something. But the old habit rose in him too, the reflex older than the hunger, the waiting, the watching of the giver's face for the moment the food would be snatched back, and the whole thing revealed as a test he had failed by wanting it. Grandmama watched him hesitate. She did not comment. She simply picked up her own bowl and slurped from it noisily and went back to her stirring and left him entirely alone with the food, which was, though he did not have the word for it, exactly the correct thing to do. And after a while, when no hand came, Harry picked up the spoon and ate, and it was the best thing he had ever tasted, and it went on being in front of him no matter how much of it he ate, because Grandmama refilled it twice without being asked and without making it a thing. Fester came down for the demonstration. He arrived through the coal chute, feet first, landing in a heap of soot and delight, a bald, round man in a heavy coat with eyes that caught the firelight and gave it back double. He had a light bulb in his mouth. It was lit. He removed it, beamed at Harry with a mouthful of teeth and residual glow, and stuck out a hand black to the wrist. "Uncle Fester," he said, "I heard we got a new one. I brought presents." He appended a canvas sack onto the table, and out of it rolled an assortment of objects that Harry's every survival instinct classified instantly as ordnance and his newer, tentative, 3-hours-old instinct classified as an invitation. Now, nobody's going to make you blow anything up. Blowing things up is a personal journey, but if you ever want to, and I think you will, you've got the face of a lad with things he'd like to see reduced to their component particles. I'll teach you to do it safe. Safe's the whole art. Any fool can make a bang. Making a bang and keeping all your fingers, that's craft. He held up a hand. It had all its fingers. This was, Harry gathered, a point of some pride and not to be taken for granted. By way of demonstration, Fester selected the smallest of the objects, a squat gray pellet, and set it in a scarred metal dish at the far end of the table, and struck a match on his own bald head, and lit it, and cupped both hands around the dish and leaned over it with the tender concentration of a man lighting a birthday candle for someone he loved. There was a small contained flash, a puff of violet smoke that arranged itself briefly into the shape of a bat before dispersing, and a smell of sulfur and oddly of oranges. Nothing broke, nothing burned, the dish was not even warmed. Controlled, Fester breathed, straightening, his face aglow with more than the afterlight. That is the whole of it, you see. Everyone thinks the danger is the point. The danger is never the point. The point is the control. Any lunatic can hurt something. It takes a gentleman to hold a fire in his 2 hands and let it out again exactly the size he meant. He looked at Harry, and under the soot and the glee something in him went quiet and shrewd and kind. "I have a feeling, my lad, that you have been made to feel like the pellet your whole life, the dangerous thing, the thing to be handled carefully and got rid of, well. In this house you are the gentleman with the fire in his hands, and we are going to teach you the difference, and it is going to be the best thing anybody ever taught you." He winked, and the shrewdness went back under the glee, and he was Fester again. "Also, I will teach you to make the smoke come out in bats. That part is just for fun." Fester lost the ring finger on his left in 71, Pugsley confided, appearing at Harry's elbow, but he found a better one, so it came out ahead. "Do you want to see the thing that ate it? It's in a jar. We named it. It's called Gerald." "Later," said Harry, and was startled to hear himself say it, the easy word, the assumption baked into it that there would be a later, that he would still be here to be shown the jar, that the day extended forward into more days in which he had a place. He had not made a plan past the next hour in years. The word came out of him ahead of the fear, and he let it stand. Pugsley took this as the deep bonding it was. He clambered onto the bench beside Harry and studied him with a scientist's affection. "Wednesday's already claimed you," he said, without resentment, laying out the political situation for a new arrival. "That's fine. I've got the guillotine club in the swamp. She can have the personal vendetta portfolio. She's better at it anyway. She holds a grudge like a mortgage. But I want you to know from me, brother to brother, that if you ever want to test a poison or get shut in a sarcophagus for the experience or be lowered into anything, I'm your man. That's what brothers do. Nobody ever let me lower them into anything before you. I've been lowering myself for years. It's not the same." And Harry, who had had a cousin who hunted him for sport and had never in his life had a brother, looked at this round, hopeful child offering to shut him in a sarcophagus as the highest gesture of fraternal love available to him, and understood the offer perfectly and accepted it in the only currency that would land. "I'd want to be lowered into the swamp first," Harry said, "if it's a good swamp." Pugsley's whole face opened like a door. "It's the best swamp," he breathed. "Oh, you're going to be brilliant." The cup floated in the middle of the kitchen, and nobody screamed. It happened the way it always happened, which is to say, without warning and against his will. Grandmama had set out cups for a hot, bitter drink she promised was medicinal and probably was, and one of them had been placed too near the edge, and Harry, reaching, had knocked it, and it had gone off the table. And in the 10th of a second before it shattered on the flags, the old cold flinch had flared up in him. The certainty of the punishment to come, the freak's fault of a broken thing, and every cell in his body had said no, and the cup had stopped. It hung in the air a foot above the floor, turning gently, the bitter drink inside it holding its own private sea level, unspilled, and Harry stared at it, and the whole kitchen went quiet, and the old script rose up in him ready to run. The shouting, the word, the cupboard, the "it's your fault, freak, how did you do that, you did that on purpose." Nobody said any of it. Fester leaned in and looked at the floating cup from underneath, delighted. Pugsley applauded. Grandmama came down off her stool and circled the phenomenon with her walnut face lit up like a woman at an auction who has spotted the real thing among the fakes. "Well now," she said softly. "Well, well, well, would you look at that?" She reached out and with one finger gave the cup a small push, and it drifted obediently, and she caught it out of the air and set it back on the table and turned to Harry with her black bead eyes shining. "You did that. On purpose or not, you did that out of that little braced body of yours because a thing was going to break and you decided it wouldn't. Do you know what that is?" Harry braced for the word. He had a lifetime of the word, freak. "That's the family gift," said Grandmama, and cackled high and pleased and clapped her gnarled hands together once. "That's the old blood, that is, coming up in you like water finding the crack. We've had it in the line for 11 generations, off and on, more often on lately. The last real one was your great-great-aunt Calpurnia, who could sour milk at 100 yards and did, at weddings she wasn't invited to. I knew it. I knew there was something in you the minute I took your chin. Underfed, underslept, and magic to the marrow." She seized his face in both hands and planted a whiskery kiss on his forehead directly over the scar. "Oh, you dear thing, you lovely dear strange thing. You're one of ours down to the bone, and you never knew it, and they had you calling yourself a freak, a freak." She said the word like a swear, like an obscenity, like the single most offensive thing she had encountered in a very long and eventful life. The gall, the absolute gall, to look at that and call it broken. Harry stood in the warm stone kitchen with an old woman's hands on his face, having done the impossible thing, the punishable thing, the thing that had gotten him locked in the dark his whole life, and having it named instead as the proof that he belonged. Something in him that had been braced for 8 years came very quietly unbraced, and he did not have a name for what rushed into the space it left, and he did not try to find one. He let it in. "Do it again," said Pugsley, thrilled. "Float something bigger, float Fester." "I would be honored," said Fester. Word of the floating cup reached Gomez before Harry did, and Gomez met him at the top of the cellar stairs, already weeping openly and unashamed, a cigar in one hand and a saber in the other, and he took Harry by the shoulders and looked into his face with brimming eyes and said, "My son, my boy. My magnificent floating boy," and kissed him on both cheeks and once on the forehead, and then held him at arm's length to admire him some more. "I have to show you something," Gomez declared, and swept him down a corridor and through a door into a long gallery Harry had not yet found, a room hung floor to ceiling with weapons, swords and sabers and rapiers and things with more edges than a sword strictly requires, gleaming in ranks, and portraits between them of Addamses down the centuries in poses of splendid menace. "The family, Harry, ours, look at them. Cousin Balthazar, who fought a duel with his own reflection and won, though it cost him the reflection. Great-uncle Nero, who was buried alive on purpose 4 times for the practice. Your family now. Every one of these dreadful faces is yours to claim, and every blade on this wall, and you will learn to use them, because an Addams who cannot fence is an Addams who has been let down by the people who love him, and I do not intend to let you down." He plucked 2 sabers from the wall and tossed one to Harry, who caught it out of the air by pure startled reflex, and Gomez roared with delight. You see the hand on him. Tish would say it's the wrists, but I say it's the soul. And guard, my boy, no, do not worry about the rules come later. The rules are for people who have not yet learned that a duel is only a conversation with the boring parts removed." He came at Harry in a bright, easy flurry, all flash and no menace, guiding Harry's clumsy parries with the blade the way a dancing master guides a first waltz. And Harry, who had never held anything but a trowel and a burden, found the weight of the saber sorting itself out in his hand, found his feet moving, found, rising up in him through the flinch and the caution, something loose and quick and unpracticed that had been in there the whole time waiting for room this size to stand up in. He got a touch in. It was luck, and Gomez had left the opening, and they both knew it, and it did not matter in the least. Gomez staggered back with his hand to his heart and his face transported. "He touched me," Gomez announced to the gallery of ancestors, to the swords, to the whole delighted house. 3 hours in this family, and he touched me. Morticia, Morticia, come and see what we have been sent." He seized Harry again and crushed him against the pinstripe, and Harry stood inside the embrace of a man who was weeping with pride over a lucky touch from a child he had met that afternoon, and did not know what to do with his arms, and after a moment lifted them and put them around Gomez and held on. "There," said Gomez softly into his hair, all the flourish gone out of his voice. "There it is. That is the only fencing lesson that matters, and you already know it. The rest is footwork." Wednesday found him afterward on the landing outside his open door, sitting on the top step with Thing beside him and the whole dark house breathing below. She sat down next to him without asking, which she never did, and for a while neither of them spoke, which suited them both. Below, Lurch was playing something slow on the piano, a piece with no bottom to it, and the notes came up through the house like water coming up through the deep of a well. "You floated a cup," Wednesday said. "It was not a question." Nothing she said was ever quite a question. It floated. "I didn't decide to. You decided. You simply decided faster than you noticed, which is the only decision that has ever mattered." She turned and looked at him in the dark, and her face in the little light was pale and serious and entirely without softness. And this, he was beginning to understand, was how she looked at the things she cared about most, the softness being reserved by Wednesday for people she intended to lie to. "I want to show you something. It is the most important thing I own, and I do not show it to people. I am showing it to you because you should know how it works, since you are in it now at the front where the good pages are." She produced the notebook. In the piano light she opened it, and Harry looked and saw that it was a ledger, ruled in her own hand into columns, and the columns had headings, and the headings were name and offense and date, and a fourth column with no heading at all, only a series of small precise marks, some of them crossed through. "I keep the names of everyone who has ever harmed a person I have decided to protect," Wednesday said. "The first column is who, the second is what they did, the third is when, the fourth." She touched it with one finger. "The fourth is whether the account has been settled. A mark means it is open. A line through the mark means it is closed. I have closed 9 accounts in my life. I am 11. She let that sit in the dark between them, a plain statement of fact and capability and inventory. "Your aunt is in here now, your uncle, your cousin, and the reedy one, and the 3 pieces of furniture, the whole street. I wrote them in the car from your wrists before you told me a single name, because I do not need to be told. I only need to see." Harry looked at the page. There in her small exact letters was the whole geography of his suffering, catalogued, dated, and held open, waiting. "You don't have to close them," he said. "Any of them. I don't need you to. I know you do not need me to. That is precisely why I will." Wednesday closed the book. "Understand me, because I am going to say it once in the dark where it counts, and then I am not going to say it again, because I find repetition sentimental. I did not choose you because you are useful, or because you are magic, or because you are pitiable, though you were all 3 when I found you, and are 2 of them still. I chose you because when the pack came you went into a bush and turned yourself to stone and waited for it to be over, and I recognized it because I have a bush of my own, a colder one that I go into, and I have never once had anyone come and sit in it beside me. So I came and sat in yours. That is the whole of it. You are mine to keep now, and I keep what is mine forever, and I let nothing touch it and live unmarked." She stood and looked down at him, small and absolute in the piano. "Learn the exits of every room. Learn which people lie by watching whether their words arrive before or after their eyes. Learn to float more than a cup. I will teach you all of it, and you will never again wait in a bush for it to be over, because I will already be standing at the mouth of the bush, and it will be over for them." She went to her own room, which was across the hall from his, close enough to hear, positioned, he understood, deliberately. She left her door open a hand's width. He looked at the strip of light under it for a long time, and then, by his own free choice, and no one else's, he left his open too. He woke in the black middle of the night, not knowing where he was, which was the oldest waking he owned. The dream had been the usual one, the cupboard and the dark and the sound of the bolts, except that tonight the dark had had a green light in it, a flat cold flare that lit nothing and left an afterimage shaped like a laugh, and a voice too high to belong to anything that should be able to laugh, and he came up out of it with the sheets twisted in his fists and his own heart beat loud in his ears, and for one plummeting moment, absolute certainty that he was back under the stairs and had dreamed the whole impossible day. Then he saw the candle in the brass skull light itself softly without being asked, exactly as Fester had promised, and throw its small steady glow across a room that was too large to be a cupboard, and he remembered, and the remembering came into him slow and warm and disbelieving. There was a sound from the doorway. Wednesday stood in it in a black nightgown, her plaits undone into 2 dark curtains, holding a candle of her own, having crossed the hall the instant his breathing changed, because she slept, it turned out, the way certain animals sleep, with one ear kept back for exactly this. "You cried out," she said, "a single syllable unformed. I have been keeping a list of the sounds you make so that I will know which ones require me." She did not come in. She stood at the threshold, grave and pale, giving him the same wide berth her mother gave. "You dreamed of the cupboard. There was a green light this time," Harry said. He did not know why he told her. He had never told anyone anything. "In the dream, there isn't usually. I don't know what it is." Wednesday was quiet a moment, and something moved behind her still face, some cold and careful attention snapping to the new datum and setting it aside for later. "Green," she repeated. "I will remember that. It may mean nothing. It may mean a great deal. Either way, it is now a thing that 2 people know instead of one which halves it, though no one ever says so because it does not sound scientific." She lifted her candle. "I am going to sit in the hall outside your door until you sleep, not inside. You do not need a guard inside your own room. That is a thing the Dursleys would do. But you may leave the door open, and you may know that I am there, and that between you and the corridor and the whole of the dark house and the whole of the dark world there is me, awake with a list. She sat down on the floor in the doorway, her back to the frame, her candle beside her, and she opened a book and began to read as though it were the most ordinary hour in the world to begin a book. "Sleep, Harry, nothing is coming, and if it comes, it will find me first." Harry lay back down in the too large bed in the flicker of the self-lighting skull, and watched the shape of her in the doorway, small and straight-backed and terrible and entirely his, and slept and did not dream again. And in the morning the candle had burned down to nothing and she was gone back to her own room before he woke, and the only sign she had ever been there was the book, left closed on his floor with a slim tongue of blackened steel marking her place. The next morning there was the matter of breakfast, and the matter of breakfast was where the whole thing finally landed. Harry came down early on cupboard time, in the grey before anyone should be up, moving quietly out of habit, and found the dining room already lit and Morticia already in it, seated at the head of a long black table with a cup of something that steamed red, and the table between them laid from end to end with food. He stopped in the doorway. It was too much food. It was an obscene amount of food, a whole table of it, eggs and dark bread and a wheel of pale cheese and a bowl of blood oranges cut open and a rack of something crisped and a pot of the bitter drink and a dish of pale eggs he suspected were not chicken, and a mound of black grapes and butter in a dish shaped like a coffin, and it was all of it laid out in the grey dawn with no one eating it, and every alarm Harry had ever installed went off at once. Because in his experience a table like this was a trap, a display, a thing to be looked at and not touched, a temptation set out to catch the freak reaching. Morticia looked at him over the rim of her red cup. She did not invite him in. She did not say good morning. She saw with the terrible accuracy of a mother who had been reading a frightened child for one whole day and would read him for the rest of his life exactly what he was seeing, and she understood that an invitation was itself a kind of permission, and that a person who has been trained to ask can only be untrained by being given nothing left to ask for. So she said nothing. She set down her cup and she rose and she came around the table, and she took a plate and she filled it, not carefully, generously, heaping an amount no one would heap for a child they meant to catch out, and she set it at the place beside her own, and she pulled the chair out, and then she walked to the window at the far end of the room and stood with her back to him and looked out at the fog over the graveyard, giving him the whole table and her turned back and no eyes on him at all, no audience, no test. "Nothing to fail, the fog is early today," Morticia said to the window, to no one, to him. "It will burn off by 9 and I shall be sorry to see it go. Sit where you like, little one, eat what you like, there is no wrong amount. When you have finished there will be more, because there is always more in this house of everything, and it is all of it yours, and none of it will ever again be a thing you have to earn or ask for or deserve." She did not turn from the window. "I will stand here and watch the fog until you tell me it is safe to turn around. Take as long as you need. I have buried men with less patience than I am prepared to spend on your breakfast." Harry stood in the doorway of the long dark dining room with his heart doing something it had no instructions for. Then he crossed the room and he sat in the chair she had pulled out at the place she had laid, and he picked up the fork and he ate without asking, without watching the door, without waiting for the hand that would take it away, because it was not going to be taken away, and some part of him that had held its breath for 8 years finally, in the grey light, over a coffin-shaped dish of butter, let it go. He ate a great deal. He had not known he could eat a great deal, having spent his life on the calculated remainders of other people's plates, and the discovery that his own appetite was large and that largeness was permitted was its own small vertigo. He ate the dark bread and the pale unlikely eggs and the crisp things and 2 of the blood oranges, and every time a plate emptied it filled again from somewhere, without comment, without ceremony, the way the tide comes in, and he understood, somewhere around the second orange, that this was going to be true tomorrow as well, and the day after, and that there was no bottom to it, no point at which the food would run out or the welcome would, and that he could stop at last. Doing the arithmetic of scarcity he had been doing since before he could name it, he set the arithmetic down beside his fork. He did not pick it up again for a long time, and when he finally did, years later, it was only to teach it to another rescued child so that they too could learn to put it down. At the window, Morticia Addams watched the fog and did not turn around until he told her she could, and when at last he said, quietly, around a mouthful of dark bread, that she could turn around now, she did, and she looked at the empty plate and she looked at him and she said only, "You may have thirds," and went to fetch them herself. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Blooming a year in the Addams house changed Harry the way water changes a stone, which is to say slowly and completely, and without the stone ever quite noticing the moment it stopped being the shape it had been. He grew. This was the first and simplest thing, and Grandmamma took a professional satisfaction in it, marking his height on the doorframe of the kitchen with a knife rather than a pencil, because a knife lasted, and by the second autumn the marks had climbed a full hand up the wood. His face filled in. The chronic braced look, the flinch built into the shoulders, the habit of eating fast and glancing at the door, all of it wore away like a chalk figure in the rain, not because anyone told him to stop, but because there was nothing left in the house to keep it wound. He learned to sleep through the night. He learned to leave food on his plate and come back to it, secure that it would still be there, which is a form of wealth no one who has always had it can properly understand. And he was, it turned out, being raised by experts, though their expertise was in subjects no ordinary school taught. Gomez had him fencing every morning before breakfast, in the long weapons gallery under the eyes of the ancestors, and Harry's clumsy startled parries of the first week had become, over the months, something with a shape to it, quick and economical and a little bit sly, a style that Gomez pronounced with great feeling to be entirely Harry's own and unlike any Addams before him. You fight like a person who spent years learning to make himself small and has decided to use it as an advantage instead of a wound, Gomez said, saluting him with the saber after Harry slipped inside his guard for the third time in a row. Do you know how rare that is? Most people carry their childhoods like an anchor. You have made a knife out of yours. Cara mia, he called to Morticia, who was pruning something venomous by the window. Our son disarmed me, twice. 3 times, moaned Cher, said Morticia, not looking up. The first one counted. You are being gallant. Wednesday's lessons were different, and they were the ones Harry loved best, though loving them was a thing he would have kept from her under torture, if only to see whether she would develop a technique specifically for that. She taught him to throw a knife, standing behind him in the drizzle with her cold hands correcting his elbow, her voice flat and exact in his ear, until the day the blade went into the center of the target with a sound like a full stop, and she said nothing at all, which from Wednesday was a standing ovation. She explained, on the days she explained anything, that the knife was not the point, that a knife was only a way of practicing the thing that mattered, which was the deciding. Most people cannot decide, she said, retrieving the blade, weighing it, handing it back. They wish and they hope and they wait to see, and the blade feels the waiting and goes wide. You do not wait anymore. You lost the habit of waiting in a hydrangea bush and you are not getting it back, and it is the only reason I bother teaching you, because a knife thrown by a person who has stopped waiting to be rescued goes exactly where it is sent. She nodded at the target, the blade quivering dead in its center. That is not marksmanship. That is a person who has decided he is allowed to hit what he aims at. The rest is grip. Harry threw again and hit again and did not smile because she had taught him that too, that the work was the reward and the grinning was for people who were surprised by their own competence, and Harry had stopped being surprised by himself, which was, of everything the house had given him, perhaps the largest gift. She taught him archery and lockpicking, which things supervised, and the reading of people, which she considered the true weapon, and the rest mere ornament. Everyone tells you what they are, she said, the two of them lying flat on the roof one gray afternoon, watching the drive through a spyglass for the pure discipline of watching. They cannot help it. The trick is that they tell you with the parts of themselves they are not guarding because they are too busy guarding the mouth. Watch the hands. Watch the feet which point at the thing a person wants and the exit a person fears. Watch which way the eyes go before the words come. If the eyes arrive first, it is true. If the words arrive first and the eyes catch up, it is a story they are telling you, and you must ask yourself why. She passed him the spyglass. The postman is coming up the drive. Tell me 3 true things about him before he reaches the gate. Harry looked. He hates the walk up. He slows down before he can see the house properly, so he's been up here before and it frightened him. And he's got something in the left satchel he doesn't want to deliver because he keeps touching it to make sure it's still there, which means part of him hopes it isn't. Wednesday was silent for a moment, then she took the spyglass back. Adequate, she said, which was, from Wednesday, the word she had once used to describe an entire summer, and Harry understood the size of the compliment and had the sense not to acknowledge it. There were other teachers and other lessons, and between them they had built him. Grandmama took him into the apothecary off the kitchen and taught him the shelf of jars, not to make anything a person could make trouble with. She was firm on that. The interesting things stayed in her hands, but to know a smell from a smell, a leaf from a leaf, which mushroom was supper and which was farewell, because a person who could not tell the difference, she said, had no business eating in the woods or trusting anyone. She let him stir the great never-washed pot, and taught him that patience was the only ingredient that mattered and the only one nobody stocked. And she told him stories while he stirred, of Addams's dead and Addams's merely resting, of a family that reached back and back into the dark and had at last a new small branch grafted onto it that had grown from a Surrey garden, and she said this last part gruffly and did not look at him while she said it, which was how he knew she meant it most. Lurch taught him the piano, which no one expected, least of all Harry. It began because Harry had come down one sleepless night and found Lurch at the great instrument in the dark, playing something with no bottom to it, and had sat on the bench beside him and not spoken. And Lurch had, without a word, taken one of Harry's hands and set it on the keys and pressed one enormous gray finger down over Harry's own to sound a single low note, and that was the first lesson, and it lasted an hour, and it was one note. By the second winter, Harry could play a little badly in the low registers Lurch favored, and the two of them would sit at the keyboard in the small hours making music that sounded the way the house felt, and Lurch would groan the good groan, and Harry would understand every word of it. He was becoming, in short, an Addams, which is not a thing you are born, but a thing that is built in you by people who have decided you are worth the labor. And he had a brother now, which was a stranger and better thing than the fencing or the storms, because Harry had spent his whole life being hunted by a cousin and had assumed that was simply what larger boys were for. Pugsley was not for hunting. Pugsley was for building trebuchets and for testing whether the swamp had gotten deeper over the winter, and for the Guillotine Club, which had exactly 2 members and a strict constitution Pugsley had written in crayon. Pugsley let Harry lower him into things and lowered Harry into things in exchange, with a scrupulous fairness that Harry came to understand was Pugsley's whole religion. When Harry did something well, Pugsley told everyone at volume for days. When Harry did something badly, Pugsley took him aside and showed him the trick of it and never mentioned it again. He had been an only child among relations who were adults, and he had wanted a brother the way Harry had wanted a home, quietly, for years, without daring to say so, and now that he had one, he applied himself to it with the tireless devotion of a boy who has finally been given the one thing he asked for. "I like having a brother," Pugsley told him one afternoon, apropos of nothing, the 2 of them lying on their backs in the long grass of the graveyard watching a thunderhead Harry had not that time made. "I practiced, before you came. I used to lower a sack of turnips into the swamp and call it Brian and pretend Brian was talking back. Brian was all right, but he wasn't a real brother, he was just turnips." He turned his round, earnest face to Harry. "You're better than turnips." "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me," said Harry, and meant it, and Pugsley nodded, satisfied, a diplomat who has landed his point, and they went back to watching the sky, 2 brothers in a graveyard, one of whom had spent years talking to a sack of turnips, and one of whom had spent years talking to a spider named Gwendolen, having found, at last, someone real to talk to instead. He had a birthday that year, a real one, the first of his life that anyone had marked on purpose, and the family did it the way the family did everything, which is to say entirely wrong and exactly right. Harry had not told them the date. He had not, in fact, been certain of it, having spent his birthdays under the stairs listening to Dudley's parties overhead, and had come to think of the 31st of July as a day like any other on which he happened to have been born, and no one happened to care. But Thing had found it in the paperwork Grandmama had extracted from the Dursleys, and had spelled it out against Morticia's palm one evening. And so on the morning of the 31st Harry came down to a dining room hung floor to ceiling in black crepe and dead roses, with Gomez standing on the table conducting Lurch through a dirge Fester had written for the occasion, and a cake in the center of it all, tall and black and dripping, shaped like a headstone, with Harry's name iced across it above 2 dates. "The second of which was blank. We left it open," Morticia explained, seeing him look at it. "It seemed presumptuous to guess. You will fill it in yourself in your own time, a very long time from now. We intend to see to that." She drew out his chair. "Sit, birthday boy. There are 9 black candles, 1 for each year the world had you and did not deserve you, and you must blow them out and make a wish, and the wish must be a terrible one, because sweet wishes never come true and terrible ones always do." Harry sat before the headstone cake with his name on it in a room draped in mourning for the years he had lost, and he looked at the 9 flames, and around him the whole family had gone quiet and expectant, Gomez still up on the table, Pugsley with an armful of what would turn out to be birthday dynamite, Fester glowing faintly, Grandmama Lurch Thing perched on the cake stand, and Wednesday at his shoulder, watching him as she watched everything that mattered to her. Which was to say, without appearing to watch at all. He had never made a wish in his life. He had learned early that wishing was a door, and that the things that came through it were never the things you had asked for. He looked at the candles and understood that he had sitting in front of him everything he would ever have wished for, delivered before he had known how to want it, and that a wish now would be a kind of greed. And then he understood, too, that greed was permitted here, that wanting more was not a sin in this house, that he was allowed, at last, to want. "I wish," he said, and his voice came out steadier than he meant it to stay. "That's the terrible one. That's the one I'm not allowed to want, and I'm wanting it anyway. I wish to stay here with all of you forever, and I wish that anyone who ever tries to take me away from here gets exactly what they deserve." He blew out the candles, all 9 in one breath. There was a silence. "That," said Gomez from the table, his voice not entirely steady, "is the finest birthday wish I have ever heard, and I once heard Cousin Vlad wish for the plague and get it." He leapt down and seized Harry and kissed him on both cheeks. "Granted, my boy, granted 1,000 times over. You will stay forever, and anyone who tries to take you will get exactly, precisely, elaborately what they deserve, and we will make of their deserving a family occasion." He turned to the room. "Pugsley, the dynamite." The dynamite was, it developed, for the cake. The trouble arrived, as trouble usually does, wearing a lanyard. They had gone into the village, all of them, which the village dreaded, and endured the way a small town endures an eclipse, because Morticia liked to buy black candles from the one shop that stocked them, and Gomez liked to frighten the greengrocer, whom he considered a dear friend, and the greengrocer had never recovered from the honor. Harry walked between Wednesday and Pugsley down the single crooked high street, in a black coat cut down from one of Gomez's, and he had reached the point in his blooming where he no longer folded himself smaller when strangers looked, but walked upright and looked back, which was how he came to be looking directly at the man in the beige anorak and the lanyard when the man's face changed. The man's name was Mr. Fraverton, and he was an education welfare officer for the county, and he had a clipboard, and he had been for some months in possession of a genuine puzzle, which was the case of one Harry Potter, removed from the rolls of a Surrey primary school without transfer, without paperwork, without a forwarding school, reported by his former guardians as taken by relations of an undesirable and possibly criminal character, and Mr. Fraverton had, being a diligent and self-important man, followed the puzzle north until it arrived that very afternoon at a crooked high street in the sight of the child himself, alive and upright and dressed like a Victorian undertaker, flanked by other children of similar aspect. "You," said Mr. Fraverton, stepping into their path with his clipboard held before him like a shield and a warrant. "You're the Potter boy, Harry Potter, you are, aren't you? Don't lie to me, I've a photograph." The high street, which had been pretending not to watch the Addamses, now openly abandoned the pretense. "I'm Harry," said Harry. He did not fold. He looked at the clipboard and at the lanyard and at the man's feet, which were pointed at Harry, and his shoulders, which were squared for a confrontation he had rehearsed in the car. "You've come a long way to find me." I certainly have." Fraverton's voice rose, pitched for the audience, warming to his role. "You've been taken out of school. No enrollment anywhere in the county. Your lawful guardians report you were removed by force by persons of a most irregular nature, and I can see now they were not exaggerating, and it is my duty, my legal duty, to take you into the care of the local authority pending a full investigation into your welfare and the fitness of these." And here he cast a look at Morticia and Gomez that he intended to be withering, and that arrived closer to nauseated, "These people. So you'll come with me now, boy, there's a good lad, and we'll get you somewhere safe and normal, away from all this." There was a silence on the high street. Wednesday stepped forward and Harry put out a hand, not quite touching her arm, and she stopped because they had a system, and the system was that Harry got the first move always in matters that concerned Harry, and Wednesday held the second, which was the one you did not want to reach. "You're worried about my welfare," Harry said. He said it mildly, and he had learned mildness from Morticia, who could make it the most frightening register in the language. "That's kind. Let's do it properly then. You have a photograph, so you have a file, so you have my history. Read me the entry for the 5th of November 2 years ago. It'll be a hospital note, burned hand. Do you have it?" Fraverton faltered. The file is confidential. That has no bearing on." "You don't have it because it was never written down, because I was never taken. Read me the school nurse's log for the whole of my last year at that school. Read me how many days I came in with marks on me that got explained away as sports at a school where they wouldn't let me play sports. Read me the address where I slept and the dimensions of it, and you'll find the dimensions match a cupboard, because that is where the local authorities' idea of somewhere safe and normal kept me for 8 years while men with clipboards drove past the door." Harry's voice had not risen. It had gone quieter, and the high street leaned in to hear it. "You didn't come a long way to find me, Mr. Fraverton. You drove past me for 8 years. You're only here now because the people who threw me away want the money back, and they've told you a story with the eyes arriving after the words, and you believed it because it let you feel like the hero of an afternoon. I know exactly how much investigating the authority does into a child's welfare. I'm the control group." Mr. Fraverton's mouth opened and shut. The clipboard had begun, very slightly, to lower. Morticia came forward, then gliding, and she did not raise her voice either, because no one in that family ever needed to. "You are welcome to investigate us," she said. "We invite it. Bring your inspectors, bring your forms, bring the whole apparatus of your concern, and inspect a child who has grown 2 handspans and learned 3 languages and stopped waking in the night, and compare him against the file you carry, in which he is starving in a cupboard and no one has come. And then you will do what men with files always do when the file disagrees with the child. You will close the file, because the alternative is to write down what the file's silence means about you, and no one," she said gently, terribly, "ever writes that part down." She tilted her head. "Would you like to come to tea? We would so like to show you the house." Mr. Fraverton did not come to tea. Mr. Fraverton got back into his beige car and drove south and filed a report that recommended, in the strongest possible terms, that the matter be considered closed, the child thriving, the guardians eccentric but devoted, and he never came north again, and for the rest of his life he found he could not look at a garden hydrangea without a feeling he declined to examine. Wednesday, walking home, took out her notebook and made an entry, and Harry looked over and saw that she had written not Fraverton's name but the words "the authority," and under offense, a single line, "drove past for 8 years. "You don't have to keep that one open," Harry said. "That one is not for closing," said Wednesday. "That one is for remembering. There is a difference, and you taught it to me this afternoon on a high street in front of a greengrocer. I am adding a column." She wrote a new heading at the top of a fresh page in her small exact hand, and the heading was Things Harry Is Right About, and she entered the first item beneath it and did not show him what it said and put the book away. The Dursleys came in the spring, which took a particular kind of nerve, and Harry had to admit a grudging respect for the sheer force of Vernon's greed, that it could drive him up that hill and through that gate into that door. They came in the company car, Vernon and Petunia both, Vernon in his best suit with a document wallet under his arm, and they had rehearsed. You could see it in the way Vernon squared himself on the step, and Petunia stood behind him looking anywhere but at the graveyard. They had come, Vernon announced to Lurch, who opened the door and filled it, to discuss the matter of the child and the matter of certain moneys, and the matter of that child being returned to his lawful home now that everyone had had their fun. Lurch looked down at them for a long moment. Then he groaned, the second groan, the one Pugsley had catalogued, and stood aside to let them in, which was worse than turning them away, because it meant the house had been given permission to have them. They were shown to the parlor. Tea was brought by Thing on a silver tray, and Petunia watched the disembodied hand pour and set down the cups in retreat, and made the kettle noise again, the one Harry remembered from the doorstep at Privet Drive, and had the sense now to understand that she had spent her whole life braced against the wrong dangers. Gomez and Morticia received them with a courtesy so complete it was indistinguishable from a threat. And Harry came in and stood by the cold hearth and let them look at him and watched them fail to find in the tall, clear-eyed child in the well-cut black coat the small braced thing they had shipped off in a hearse and expected to find broken or begging or gone. "Harry," said Petunia, her voice did something complicated. "You've grown." "I have," said Harry. "We've come to take you home," said Vernon, and got the document wallet out and began the speech, which involved words like lawful and blood in the phrase your proper place, and a certain amount about how the arrangement had never been meant to be permanent, and how there had been financial provisions made for the child's upbringing, provisions that ought by rights to follow that child back to the family that had, after all, taken him in when no one else would. And Harry let him get all the way to the end of it, because Wednesday had taught him that you let a liar finish, always, because the shape of the whole lie tells you more than any single part of it. "You want the money," Harry said when Vernon ran down. "There's a stipend. There was always a stipend, wasn't there? Someone's been paying you to keep me all these years, and it stopped when I left, and you've driven 3 hours to get it back. That's the blood you've come about. That's my proper place." "It's a line item." Vernon went the color of a plum. "Now you listen to me, boy." "No," said Gomez pleasantly, and did not move, and the single word arrived in the parlor like a portcullis coming down. "He has done listening to you. He did 8 years of it. You are a guest in my house, Vernon Dursley, and I will not harm a guest. It is the one iron law of this family, and it has cost us dearly, and we keep it anyway, so you are quite safe. You may drink your tea, and you may make your case, and you may even, if you like, raise your voice to my son one more time." His smile did not waver. "Once, and then we will discover together what the iron law is worth, and how badly I have always wanted to break it, and how very much I would enjoy the guest who finally gave me the excuse." Vernon did not raise his voice again. It was Morticia who ended it in the end, and she did it without any threat at all, which was worse. She set down her cup, and she went to a small black writing desk in the corner, and she took out a single sheet of paper, and she brought it to Vernon and put it in his hand. "This is a check," she said, "for the total sum of every payment you received for Harry's keep across 8 years, plus interest, calculated generously. We have known the figure for some time. We are not poor, and we do not begrudge it, and it is yours, and you may take it and go, and never come back, and never write, and never telephone, and never appear again on any hill we are standing on. That is the price, not the money you came for. The money you came for is on that check. The price is that you sell us the last thing you have any claim to, which is the right to call yourselves his family, and you sign it away here now gladly, the way you signed him away on a doorstep, so that he never again has to wonder whether the door might open and you might be on the other side of it." She held out a pen. It was Grandmamma's pen. It smoked faintly. "Signed, Petunia. You are better at this than your husband. You have practice." Petunia looked at the check. She looked at Harry, at her dead sister's eyes in the face of a boy who had grown up loved somewhere she had refused to love him, and something crossed her narrow face that might, in a person capable of it, have been shame. She took the pen. She signed. Vernon signed after her, snatching at the check, and they left without finishing the tea, and the company car went down the hill and did not come back, and Harry stood at the window and watched it shrink to nothing on the long gray road. "Are you all right?" said Wednesday beside him, who had watched the whole thing from the passage behind the portrait and had come out only now. "Yes," said Harry, and found that it was true, and turned the fact over, surprised by it. "I thought seeing them would put me back in the cupboard. In my head it didn't, they just looked small." He watched the last of the car dissolve into the gray. "That's the part I keep getting wrong. I keep expecting the old size of everything. Vernon used to fill a whole doorway. Petunia's voice used to be the loudest thing in any room I was in, and they came all the way up here and knocked on the door, and they were just 2 frightened people in a company car, come to sell the last thing they had for money they'd already spent. I used to be the smallest thing in their house. Now they're the smallest thing in mine." He glanced at her. "You didn't do anything. I did not need to, said Wednesday. You closed that account yourself in a parlor with a check, which is more elegant than anything I had planned, and I had planned a great deal. She almost very nearly in the privacy of the window and the failing light let something show and did not because she never would. Their account is closed, but I have kept the page. For sentiment, I am told sentiment is a thing families keep. The magic came up in him that summer like the water table rising, and it stopped being cups. It happened first with the snake. There was an adder in the graveyard garden, long and gray-brown and unbothered, that lived under the leaning headstone of a gray tant, and Harry, weeding the black roses one warm evening because he had discovered he liked weeding when the weeds were not a punishment, had come upon it and gone still old habit, and the snake had lifted its head and looked at him. And Harry had said, without meaning to, without knowing he could, hello, and the sound that came out of his mouth was not hello. It was a sound like water over dry stones, a soft dragging hiss, and the snake had understood it and answered, and the two of them had held a short and not very interesting conversation, the snake being mostly concerned with the warmth of the stone and the movement of mice, and Harry had crouched in the black roses in the summer dusk conducting the first real conversation of his life in which no part of him was braced for the reply, and had entirely failed to notice that the whole family had gathered on the terrace to watch. The snake, having exhausted the subject of mice, asked Harry a question in return, which was whether Harry was the new one, the one the whole garden had been talking about since the spring, the one the roses leaned toward and the flytraps kept a place for. Harry said that he supposed he was. The snake considered this with the grave patience of its kind, and then told him in the dry water sound of its speech that gardens knew things before people did, and that this garden had decided he belonged in it the day he first knelt down to weed it without being made to, and that a garden did not decide such things lightly, having all the time in the world and no reason to hurry. Then it went back under the headstone, its business concluded, and Harry stood up in the dusk among the black roses and turned around and found 9 faces watching him from the terrace, and not one of them wore the look he had spent his life learning to read, the look that meant a strange thing had happened and it was his fault. They wore instead the other look, the one he was still learning, the one that meant a strange and wonderful thing had happened and it was his doing, and they were glad. Parcel tongue breathed Grandmama when he came in, her black-bead eyes enormous. He's a snake speaker. Oh, that's old, that's older than us, and we are not young. That went out of the ordinary line centuries ago. That's a wizard's gift, a proper wizard, not just the family knack. She seized his face as she did and studied it, and her ancient thumb went, as it always did, to the scar. Where did you come from, Harry Potter? She murmured, not to him, to the scar, to the question of him. What are you under all that thriving? Somebody made you, and it wasn't your aunt, and it wasn't a car crash, and I have half a mind to find out, and the other half of my mind says leave it. Let the child bloom. The questions will come and knock on the door soon enough. They always do. They did not leave it entirely. Morticia took Harry into the conservatory that night, among the plants that leaned toward him now when he passed, the great black flytraps and the vine with the appetite and the orchid that had learned his footstep, and she told him what little she had reasoned, that he was more than the family gift. That the gift in the Addams line was real and old, but it did not make snake speakers, and it did not put lightning-shaped scars on infants, and it did not make instruments in far-off institutions tick and turn, though she could not have known about the instruments, and only felt, as she felt an oncoming change in the weather, that somewhere a long way off something had begun to pay attention. There is a world you came out of, Morticia said, cool fingers moving among the black petals, deadheading with a surgeon's love. That is not your aunt's world and is not entirely ours, and it lost you or gave you away or hid you, and one day it is going to remember and come looking, and when it does it will find you here, grown and clever and loved, and it will not know what to do with you, because a thing that has been loved past all their expectations is the one thing their kind never plans for. She turned and looked at him in the green underwater light of the conservatory. When they come, Harry, and they will come, you must remember one thing above all the rest: you were not found by them. You were found by us in a garden in the cold, and we chose you before we knew you were anything at all except a child that no one wanted, which is the only reason to choose anyone that has ever meant a thing. Whatever they tell you that you were ours first, and you were ours for free. The gift did not stay small after that. It came up in him all through that year in ways that stopped being tricks and started being weather. There was the afternoon the storm came when he called it, or when it came because he wanted it, which turned out to be the same sentence read from either end. Pugsley had been lowered into the swamp, at Pugsley's own delighted insistence, and the rope had fouled on a root, and for a bad half-minute Pugsley had gone under, and Harry, hauling on the tangled line with the old cold thing rising in him, the one that came whenever something he loved was about to be taken, had felt something enormous crack open behind his ribs, and the clear July sky had gone slate-dark in the space of 3 breaths. And the wind had come up off the fields hard enough to bend the dead trees, and the swamp had heaved and coughed Pugsley up onto the bank soaked and grinning and entirely unharmed, and the rain had come down in a black sheet, and Harry had stood in the middle of it, streaming, shaking, holding the slack rope, with a storm he had made hammering down around him and answering. He understood to the pitch of the thing that had cracked open behind his ribs. Gomez had come running and had taken one look at his drenched, wild-eyed, storm-wreathed son, and had thrown back his head and laughed with pure delight into the downpour. "He summons the tempest," he cried, "to save his brother. Tish, Tish, come and be rained on. Our son has opinions about the weather." Morticia came out into the black rain without an umbrella because she preferred it, and stood beside Harry and put a cool hand on the back of his neck until the shaking eased and the wind dropped and the sky slowly remembered July. "You are not the family gift," she said quietly under the last of the rain. "We have known it a while. The family gift is a candle. You are the whole storm, Harry, and storms are not raised, they are only recognized, and someone somewhere before us knew what you were and it frightened them because they were the sort of people who are frightened by storms instead of standing in them." She turned him to face her. "We are not that sort. Raise all the weather you like. We will come out into every inch of it and be glad of the rain and never once ask you to be a candle." He gave Wednesday the rose at the end of that summer, and it was the making of something between them that no coming world would ever unmake. He had grown it himself in the corner of the conservatory Morticia had given him for his own experiments, a rose bush black as the inside of a chimney, and he had done to it over weeks, patient and secret, the thing he was learning he could do, the coaxing, the leaning in of his gift, until the bush produced a single bloom unlike any other in the house. A black rose the size of a fist, velvet-petaled, sweet-scented, and armed along every inch of its stem with thorns that moved, that turned toward a hand that was not Harry's, that had learned from him to bite. He cut it, which the rose permitted, and he brought it to Wednesday on the roof where she was cleaning a raven that had had an accident with the chimney, and he held it out to her, stem first, safe, the thorns lying flat and quiet in his grip. "I made you something," Harry said. "It's a rose. It's also a weapon, it smells nice, and it draws blood, and it only ever answers to the person who's given it, which is you from now on if you want it, I thought." He stopped and started again because he had learned in this house that you were allowed to finish the true thing. "You gave me a blade with my name on it the first night, and you said it wasn't a transaction, so this isn't one either. It's the same thing back. It's a rose that bites for a girl who bites, and it's mine that I made and I'm giving it away, which is a thing I couldn't do before I came here because I never had anything, and now I have a rose and I'm giving it to you." Wednesday set down the raven. She took the rose by the stem, and the thorns, which had bitten every other hand in the house on principle during its brief life, lay down along the length of it under her fingers and stayed down, having recognized their new and permanent authority. She looked at the black bloom and she looked at Harry, and for a moment, one moment on a cold roof in the last light of summer, Wednesday Addams came as close to smiling as she had ever come or ever would, which was to say her face did not change at all, and yet something behind it turned toward him the way the plants in the conservatory turned, the way the whole strange loving house had turned the day he arrived, because a thing had leaned toward her without being braced and offered itself and asked nothing. And she had spent her whole cold life waiting for exactly that and had told no one, not even the ledger. "I accept," she said. "It is the correct color and it draws blood and it is from you, and I will keep it until it dies, and then I will press it and keep it dead, which is longer." She threaded it into her hair above her ear where the thorns settled against her scalp and did not bite her, and she picked the raven back up and went on cleaning it, and Harry sat down beside her on the roof, and neither of them said anything else, and the sun went down over the graveyard garden and the long gray country beyond, where, though neither of them yet knew it, in a round office at the top of a distant tower, a small silver instrument had just stopped spinning. And a very old man had just looked up. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The watchers in a circular office at the top of a tower in Scotland, a small silver instrument on a spindle-legged table stopped turning, and Albus Dumbledore, who had learned across a very long life to notice the moment a familiar sound goes missing, looked up from his correspondence. The instrument was one of a dozen delicate silver contraptions that whirred and ticked on that particular table, and it had turned steadily night and day for very nearly 10 years, and its turning had meant a specific and precious thing, which was that the blood protection he had built around a certain house in Surrey still held, that the child who lived beneath its wards was still bound to the place his mother's sacrifice had made safe, and that the plan, the long and careful and necessary plan, was intact. The instrument had been slowing for 2 years. He had noted it and told himself it was settling, the way old magic settles, and had not gone to look, because going to look meant admitting there was something to see. Now it had stopped. Dumbledore set down his quill. He rose and crossed to the table and took the instrument up in his long fingers and turned it over, and it did not resume because the thing it measured was gone and had been going for 2 years while he told himself a story about settling. He was old enough and honest enough in the privacy of that high room to name the story for what it was. He had not gone to look because he had not wanted to know. That was the whole of it, dressed up in the robes of strategy. The most powerful wizard of the age had been afraid of a silver toy, because the silver toy had begun, very quietly, to accuse him. He sat down again heavily, and for a while he did not do anything at all except hold the still instrument and think about a night 10 years gone and a doorstep and a basket and a letter he had written and left with a sleeping infant in the November cold because it had seemed at the time the lesser of the available cruelties. Petunia Dursley had been the child's blood was the anchor of the oldest protection there was. He had weighed the coldness of that house against the safety of its walls, and he had chosen the walls, and he had told himself that a child could survive being unloved if being unloved kept him alive to do the thing the prophecy said he must one day do. He had told himself that for 10 years. The instrument had just stopped agreeing with him. There was a soft sound at the window, and a phoenix the color of a sunset regarded him with an ancient and unsympathetic eye, and Dumbledore looked back at the bird that had seen him make worse choices than this and forgive himself for them, and he did not this time reach for the comfort of being forgiven. "He is not at Privet Drive," Dumbledore said aloud to the bird, to the room, to the still silver thing in his hand. "He has not been for some time, and I did not go to look." He set the instrument down. "Well, that is a debt, and it has come due, and I am too old to pretend otherwise." He reached for a fresh sheet of parchment and a quill, and the weariness went out of his movements, replaced by the other thing, the thing that had kept him ahead of darker men for a century, the cold, clean machinery of a mind that had already stopped grieving and begun to plan. "Minerva," he said to the empty room, writing. "I think it had better be Minerva. She knew the family. She will want to see it for herself, and she will be honest with me about what she finds, which is a quality I appear to have mislaid somewhere on a doorstep in Surrey. 3 floors underground in the Ministry of Magic, in an office with no windows and a great many filing cabinets, a woman named Wilhelmina Grouse felt the tremor of the case cross her desk and knew, the way a spider knows, that something large had landed in the web. Grouse was the deputy head of the Office for the Welfare and Guardianship of Magical Minors, a title she had spent 19 years assembling out of smaller titles, and she was very good at her work, which was not, whatever the door said, the welfare of magical minors. Her work was the management of leverage. A child was a set of claims, a bundle of futures, a vault key and a bloodline and a vote that would one day be cast, and the office that held guardianship over a child held all of that in trust, which is a word that means power dressed for church. Grouse had built a quiet empire out of orphans nobody wanted, and she had done it without once raising her voice, and she was, in her own estimation, a public servant of the highest kind, which is the estimation such people always hold of themselves. The tremor was a records flag. Someone senior had made a discreet inquiry into the current guardianship status of one Harry James Potter, and the inquiry had brushed against the automatic wards on the file, and the file had done what files did, which was to whisper to the person whose job it was to listen. Grouse pulled the file. She read it. She read it again, and the second time she read it she went very still, in the particular way of a person who has just understood the size of the thing on the desk in front of her. Harry Potter, the Potter boy, the one from the war, the survivor, the little living monument every witch and wizard in Britain had toasted for a decade. And here in the plain grey prose of the ministry was the fact that no one had bothered to check, because everyone had assumed Dumbledore had it in hand. The Potter guardianship was, at law, a mess. The Muggle relations had signed something. There had been payments, irregular ones, arranged off the books by the headmaster himself, which was interesting, that was very interesting, a great man cutting a corner and leaving the file open. And the child's actual whereabouts were, as of this morning's flag, officially unknown to the ministry. An unclaimed guardianship over the most famous child in the country, sitting in an open file on her desk in her office. Grouse did not smile because she had trained herself out of smiling, smiles being information one gives away for free. She smoothed the file closed with one dry hand and sat with it, thinking, and the thinking arranged itself with the smooth, cold efficiency that had built her 19 years of titles. Dumbledore had let the guardianship lapse. Whoever had the child now had no legal standing that a competent office could not dissolve in an afternoon. And a ministry that held lawful guardianship over Harry Potter, that could produce him, safe and grateful and properly grateful to the office that had rescued him from whatever irregular arrangement he had fallen into, that ministry and the deputy who arranged it would hold a thing worth more than gold, which is a thing worth influence. Not lost, Grouse murmured to the empty windowless office, merely misfiled, and misfiling is remarkably easy to correct when one has the correct forms. She drew a fresh sheet of ministry parchment toward her and dipped her quill, and began in a small tidy hand to build the instrument that would make Harry Potter a ward of the state, and herself the hand the state extended, and she worked with the patience of a woman who had never in her life been in a hurry, because the patient always inherit the impatient, and Wilhelmina Grouse intended to inherit a great deal. There was one variable her tidy calculations did not contain, and it was not in any file, because no file the ministry possessed had a column for what the Addams family was. Grouse believed that anything real could be reduced to a form, and she had built 19 years of titles on being right about that. Somewhere to the north, in a house full of exceptions, The form was about to meet a family that had never once in 300 years agreed to fit inside one. Arabella Figg had been watching number 4 Privet Drive for 10 years, and she had known for 2 that the child was gone, and she had not reported it, because she was a squib and a coward, and she had convinced herself that no news was the same as good news, which is the particular self-deception of people who would rather not think too hard about the person they answer to. She sat now in her cat-smelling parlor across the letter that had arrived by owl that morning, summoning her to account, and she wrung her hands, and she practiced her explanations, none of which survived being said aloud. The truth was simple and did her no credit. 2 autumns ago a black hearse had come and gone, and the child had gone with it willingly, holding the hand of a pale woman as though she had hung the moon. And Arabella had watched it happen from behind her nets and had done nothing because the child had looked, in a way she had not seen in all the 10 years she had watched him, like a child instead of a ghost, and some cowardly kind thing in her had not been able to make herself pick up the enchanted mirror and report that the asset had walked off the board. She had watched him leave, and she had thought good, and she had said nothing for 2 years, and now the reckoning was on her hearth in green ink. When Minerva McGonagall arrived that afternoon, in a traveling cloak the color of a storm cloud with her mouth set in the flat line that had silenced 40 years of classrooms, Arabella told her everything in a rush, weeping a little, and Minerva listened without interrupting, which was worse than interrupting, and when it was done she was quiet for a long moment. "A hearse," Minerva repeated, "a great long black one, and people out of a nightmare, Minerva, I've never seen the like. A woman all in black that the cold seemed to love, and a man that jumped a wall like it wasn't there, and a little girl. There was a little girl. She looked at my house just once from the pavement, and I had to sit down. And they went into number 4, and there was some business at the door I couldn't hear, and then they came out, and the child was with them, and Vernon Dursley was standing on his own step signing papers and looking like a man who'd been let off a hanging." Arabella twisted her hands. "And the child was smiling, Minerva, he was smiling. I'd never once seen him smile in 10 years, and he walked off with the monsters, and he was smiling, and I thought, whatever those people are, they can't be worse than this street was to him, and I said nothing. I'll take what's coming, but I'd do it again." Minerva McGonagall looked at the frightened old squib in her cat-smelling parlor, and something in the schoolmistress's severe face moved, and did not soften exactly but shifted, as a judge's face shifts when the confession turns out to be a smaller crime than the one on the charge sheet. "You will not take what is coming, Arabella," she said, "because there is nothing coming. You watched a starving child be carried out of a house of cruelty by someone who wanted him, and you let it happen. If that is a crime, then I have spent my life on the wrong side of the law, and I begin to suspect I have." She rose and drew her cloak about her, and her eyes had gone to the window, to number 4 across the way, scrubbed and blind and empty. "Albus left him here, I told him. I sat in that man's presence 11 years ago, and I told him these were the worst kind of muggles, and he told me it was for the greater good, and I let him tell me, because he is Albus Dumbledore and I am not, and a child has spent his childhood in a cupboard while the 2 of us congratulated ourselves on our long view." She was very still. "I am going to go and find this boy. And if he is smiling, Arabella, if these people who came in a hearse have given him a single thing this street withheld, then I am going to have a great deal to say to Albus about the greater good, and for once he is going to listen." The Dursleys, when McGonagall called upon them, lied and lied badly, and their lies told her more than the truth could have. She came to them as a ministry woman, which was near enough to true, in a severe suit and with a severe folder, and she asked her questions in the front room over tea that Petunia's hands were not steady enough to pour, and Vernon blustered and Petunia flinched, and between the 2 of them they built a story with no floor in it. The child had been trouble. The child had been taken by relations. No, they didn't know where. No, there was no address. No, they hadn't kept in touch. Why would they? Good riddance. Yes, papers had been signed, but the papers were long lost. No, they couldn't describe the people, ordinary people, foreign perhaps, who could say. McGonagall let them dig. She had taught 11-year-olds for 40 years, and there was nothing an adult could do to lie to her that a child had not already tried more skillfully. She watched Vernon's eyes go up and to the left when he reached for a detail he had to invent, and she watched Petunia's hand go twice to a drawer in the sideboard and stop, and she noted the fresh paint on the hall wall where something the height of a small person's kicking foot had been covered over, and she catalogued the absence, in a house obsessed with itself, of a single photograph of the child they claimed to have raised for a decade. "You received payments," McGonagall said at length, setting down her cup. It was not a question, and Vernon's face confirmed it before his mouth denied it. "A stipend for the child's keep, and when he left the payment stopped and you resented it, and recently, I would guess within the last year, someone came or you went to try to get them back, and it did not go the way you hoped." She looked at Petunia. "You went to the people who took him. You have seen them again. You know where he is." "We don't," Vernon started. "Mrs. Dursley," said McGonagall, ignoring him entirely, and Petunia's head came up. "I knew your sister. I taught her. Lily was one of the finest students it was ever my privilege to teach, and she was kind, which is rarer than clever, and she would be standing in this room right now taking it apart brick by brick if she knew what her son's childhood had been. I am not here to punish you. Heaven knows there is punishment enough already living in this house behind the fresh paint. I am here to find him. So you will tell me where these people are and their name, and you will do it because somewhere under all of this you are still the girl whose sister loved her, and that girl knows the difference between what is easy and what is right, even if she stopped choosing it a long time ago. The front room was silent. The mantel clock ticked. On the mantelpiece stood a plastic trophy and 11 framed photographs of a fat blonde boy at various ages, and not one single picture of anyone else. Petunia Dursley got up and went to the sideboard and opened the drawer she had reached for twice and took out a business card, black with silver lettering, that she had kept for reasons she could not have named and had not thrown away, though she had thrown away so much, and she put it in Minerva McGonagall's hand. The card said in a fine funereal script, the Addams family, and beneath it an address, and beneath the address a single line which Petunia had read 100 times without understanding why it made her want to weep. We are always home to those who belong. They love him, Petunia said in a voice that had nothing left in it to defend with. That's the thing I can't, that's the thing. They took one look at him and they loved him in an afternoon, and I had him for 10 years. She sat back down. Tell him if you find him, tell him I said. She stopped. There was in the end nothing she had the right to send. No, don't tell him anything, just tell him we won't come again. That's the only kindness I've got left that's worth the postage. Minerva McGonagall took the black card and stood a moment in the pinched, spotless front room, among the 11 photographs of the son they had kept and the nothing at all of the nephew they had not, and she found that she had come intending to be severe and could not manage it, because severity is for people who might yet do better, and Petunia Dursley had made her choices a long decade ago and would live inside them now until she died in a clean house beside a clean man. With a clean conscience she had scrubbed so hard there was nothing left of it. That was punishment enough. It was more than any court could have handed down, and it had been self-inflicted, which is the only sentence that never gets appealed. I will not tell him you asked after him, McGonagall said at the door, drawing on her gloves. You are right that you have not earned the sending of it, but I will tell you one thing, Mrs. Dursley, for your own keeping, since you seem to have decided to keep the hard things. Lily's boy is happy. I do not know these Addams people, and from the sound of them I may not care for them. But the woman who took your nephew's hand in a garden did in an afternoon what you could not do in 10 years, and he is thriving now and safe and grown, and none of it is owed to you. She opened the door onto the tidy street. You could have had that. It was standing in your hallway for a decade in a jumper 3 sizes too big. I hope the photographs are worth the wall you spent it on. She went out and did not look back, and left Petunia Dursley alone with the mantle and the clock and the 11 framed faces of the child she had chosen and the ringing absence of the one she had not. The mansion knew it was being watched before the watcher did. A tabby cat with square markings around its eyes had appeared at the foot of the drive 3 days running, sitting very still with the unnatural patience of no cat that ever lived, observing the gate, the graveyard, the comings and goings, and the house had noticed at once, the way the house noticed everything, and had begun in its fashion to make the visitor welcome. On the first day a saucer of cream appeared at the gatepost, and beside it a saucer of something darker that the cat declined. On the second day a small card, hand-lettered by Morticia, was propped against the gate. To our observer, do come in, the vantage is better from the terrace. On the third day, when Minerva McGonagall in her feline form had crept up the drive to a point beneath the dead willow from which she believed she could see the house unseen, she found waiting for her in the willow shade a wing-back chair, a footstool, a tartan blanket in the precise green of the McGonagall clan, a pot of tea kept hot under a cozy, and Wednesday Addams seated in a matching chair reading a book, who did not look up. You may as well have the chair, said Wednesday, turning a page. You have been sitting on the cold ground for 3 days. A cat can bear it. The woman inside the cat is 61 and has a knee that aches when the pressure drops, which it is doing. There will be rain by 6. I had Lurch bring the blanket. It is your tartan. My mother researched it. She researches everyone who watches the house. It is a courtesy she extends, like leaving the porch light on. The cat stared at her. Then slowly it changed, unfolding upward into the tall figure of Minerva McGonagall, who stood beneath the willow in her storm-cloud cloak, entirely undone in a way 40 years of adolescence had never managed, looking down at a 13-year-old girl who had known her for a transfigured witch on sight and set out a blanket in her clan colors. How long have you known? McGonagall said. Since the first hour. You hold your tail the way a person holds a grudge, and no true cat has ever wanted anything as badly as you want to see inside that house, cats being above wanting. Wednesday closed her book. Sit, Professor, the tea is real and the chair is comfortable and neither is poisoned, which I mention because you are wondering, and because in this family a poisoned tea would be a mark of respect, and I do not yet know you well enough to respect you. Sit. I have questions and you have questions, and I find that people who have both do better sitting down. McGonagall sat. She could not afterward have explained why, except that the child had arranged the entire encounter with a competence that left no dignified alternative, and that there was something in the flat dark gaze that a schoolteacher recognized and respected, which was a mind that had already done the arithmetic and was merely waiting for the world to catch up. "You have come for Harry," Wednesday said. "You are from the world he came out of, the one my mother said would remember him and come looking. You are the first, you will not be the last, and you are, I have decided, the least dangerous, which is why you get the blanket. Now," she folded her hands in her lap in the exact attitude of Morticia, "tell me what he is, not what you want, what he is. And I will tell you whether you are ever going to be allowed within a mile of him again, which is a decision that rests with this family, and within this family rests, in the particular matter of Harry, largely with me." Minerva McGonagall had faced down a troll in a corridor and a dark lord across a battlefield, and she found that neither had prepared her for being cross-examined under a willow by a child in plates who poured the tea while she did it. So she told the truth, because the flat dark eyes made lies seem not merely dangerous but embarrassing, a thing beneath the dignity of the occasion. She told the girl about the war, and the night the Potters died and the market had left, and the 10 years the wizarding world had spent loving an idea of a child, while the child himself lived 9 miles from the woman now pouring her tea. She told her about the school he was owed a place at, and the vault of gold that waited in his name, and the old man in the tower who had meant well and done harm, which is the most common story there is. Wednesday listened without moving, and when McGonagall had finished, the girl was quiet for a while, refilling the cups, arranging the new facts in whatever cold and orderly place she kept such things. "You came to steal him," Wednesday said at last, "and found instead that you cannot look me in the eye when you say why. That is the most hopeful thing about you, and it is the reason you get to keep the blanket, and it is the reason I am going to let you leave here alive and unpoisoned, which, I remind you, is not the courtesy in this family that it is in others." She set down the pot. "You may tell the old man in the tower that Harry Potter is well. That he is grown and clever and loved and armed, and that he sleeps through the night, which he did not do when your world had the keeping of him. And you may tell him that if he wishes to see Harry he may come once with his hands empty and his destiny left at the gate, and ask like a guest, and he will be answered like a person. But if anyone comes up that drive, to take rather than to ask." She looked at McGonagall with the level patience that was, Minerva would later tell Albus, the single most frightening thing she had encountered in 50 years of frightening things. "Then they will find that this family does not lose what it has chosen, and that I keep a book, and that there is always, always room in it for another name." Minerva McGonagall folded the tartan blanket with great care and set it on the chair, and looked for a long moment at the strange small girl who had defended a child better in one afternoon than the entire Order of the Phoenix had managed in a decade, and she inclined her head, the exact severe inch she reserved for the very few people she had ever considered her equal. "I will tell him," she said, word for word, including the part about the book, especially that part. Inside, over a late supper the family had held for her return, Wednesday laid the wizarding world on the black table like a coroner laying out an anatomy. She had gotten a great deal out of McGonagall, because McGonagall, unsettled and honest and grieving her own part in an old wrong, had answered more than she meant to, and Wednesday had assembled it into a shape and brought the shape home. She told them in her flat, exact voice what Harry was. That his name was known to millions of people he had never met. That there had been a war and a man of great power and no soul, and a night when that man had come to a cottage to murder an infant and had instead been unmade by the infant's survival, and that the infant was Harry and the mark of it was the scar, and that a whole world had spent 10 years calling him a hero and a symbol and a weapon in waiting, while the actual child of the story starved in a cupboard 9 miles from where they were toasting his health. They left him there, Wednesday said. The old one, the powerful one, the headmaster. He put Harry on the doorstep himself the night his parents died, and he built a protection out of the aunt's blood, and then he went away for 10 years and did not once check whether the protection had a floor. There is a prophecy. The man who died is not entirely dead. They believe Harry will have to face him again one day and finish it, and they have been keeping Harry the way you keep a blade you intend to use, oiled and sheathed and out of the light, and they called the sheath his mother's love, and the sheath was a cupboard. She set down the fact and let it sit. That is what he is to them, not a child, a prophecy with a pulse. There was a silence at the black table. Gomez had gone very still, which was more alarming in Gomez than in anyone. Fester had stopped chewing. Grandmamma's black-bead eyes had narrowed to slits. It was Morticia who spoke, and she spoke quietly, and the candle flames leaned toward her voice. "And now they have noticed the sheath is empty," she said, "and they have come to reclaim their blade." She turned her wine glass by its stem. "How interesting. They will find, I think, that the blade has been kept somewhere warmer than they imagined, and has become something they did not forge and cannot wield, which is a person. A whole person with a home and a name he was not given as a punishment, and a family that will stand between him and anyone who reaches for him with the word destiny in their mouth." She looked around the table at her husband, her children, her brother-in-law, the ancient matriarch, the hand resting quietly on the salt cellar. We knew this day would come. We have known since the storm. Let us receive them the way we receive all guests who come to take what is ours. Her dark eyes moved to Harry, who had sat silent through the whole of it, absorbing the story of himself with the stillness he had brought out of the cupboard and never entirely lost. But gently and on terms, and only ever with his leave. Harry, you have heard what you are to them. Now hear what you are to us, which you already know, and let it be the louder of the two. Whatever they call you when they come, you are not required to answer to it. Harry looked at the ring of faces in the candlelight, the family that had spent 2 years building a person where the wizarding world had left a weapon, and he found that the story of the murdered parents and the marked infant and the prophecy did not, when it was finally told to him, arrive as the verdict he had always expected such a story to be, proof that he was strange and dangerous and doomed. It landed as information. It was a thing that had happened to him in the dark before he could remember, and it was terrible, and it belonged to him, and it was not the largest true thing about him anymore, because the largest true thing about him was that he was sitting at this table, wanted, and that was not going anywhere, prophecy or no prophecy. When they come, Harry said slowly, I want to be the one who decides what happens, not them, not even you. He looked at Morticia and at Gomez, and he said the thing the cupboard would never have let him say, the thing 2 years of open doors had taught him he was allowed to want. I've spent my whole life being moved around by people who'd already decided what I was for. The Dursleys, this headmaster, a prophecy I never got a vote in. I'm not doing it again. If they want to take me back to that world, they can ask me like I'm a person, and I'll give them my answer like I'm a person. And if they try to take me without asking. He stopped, he looked at Wednesday. Then that, said Wednesday, is where I come in. The first letter came by owl 3 days later, and the owl made the mistake of coming down the chimney. It was a large tawny bird, official-looking, with a ministry seal on the pouch at its leg, and it had been charmed to deliver its message directly to the recipient by the most efficient route, and the most efficient route into the Addams mansion, the charm decided, was the great kitchen chimney, down which the owl accordingly plummeted in a cloud of soot and indignation, landing on the never-washed pot in a state of considerable disarray. The kitchen received it as it received all visitors. A guest, said Grandmamma with enormous pleasure, and reached for a saucer. And come down the chimney, too, like a proper one. None of your knocking. Fester, it's an owl, an official owl. Look at the little bag on it. Give it a mouse. Give it 2, it's had a journey. Fester produced from about his person 2 mice, which the owl accepted with the air of a creature reassessing a situation it had been briefed to find hostile. Things scuttled up and with great delicacy, brushed the soot from its feathers and straightened its ruffled dignity while the owl watched the disembodied hand groom it and elected wisely not to have opinions. Morticia untied the pouch. Inside was a single sheet of heavy ministry parchment, and she unfolded it and read it in the firelight, and the candle flames leaned toward her as they did, and the family gathered, and Harry came to her elbow and read it with her. It was headed Office for the Welfare and Guardianship of Magical Minors, and beneath that, Notice of Review, and beneath that, in a small tidy hand that managed to be threatening while remaining perfectly polite, it informed the current occupants of the residence that the guardianship arrangement pertaining to the minor Harry James Potter had been found to be irregular, that his welfare was a matter of pressing ministry concern, that a formal review had been opened, and that representatives of the office would be calling in person at a date to be advised to assess the child's circumstances and to make such arrangements for his future as the office, in its sole discretion, deemed appropriate. It was signed W. Grouse, Deputy Head. There was a silence in the warm stone kitchen. In its sole discretion, Morticia read aloud, tasting the phrase, holding it up to the light like a specimen pinned to a card. To make such arrangements for his future as the office deems appropriate. She set the parchment down on the pot beside the owl. How perfectly lovely. They have written to tell us they intend to decide his future for him, and they have signed it, which was thoughtful because now we have the name. She looked at her son. Harry, this is the shape of it, not a rescue, not a family come to reclaim a lost boy. An office that files children the way a butcher files cuts, that has heard there is a valuable one loose, and means to put it back on the correct shelf. This is the thing that will come up the drive, behind the kind old man with the apology, if we are not careful, and possibly even if we are. Harry read the notice again, the small, tidy, threatening hand, the sole discretion, the arrangements for his future made by a woman he had never met in an office he would never see. And he found that the old cold thing did not rise in him this time at all, because he was not 8 anymore, and he was not in a cupboard, and he had a name and a home and a family and a rose that bit for a girl who bit, and a person who has all of that reads a threat differently than a person who has nothing. She spelled my name right, Harry said. Grouse, the whole thing, Harry James Potter. That's the first time anyone from an office ever got my whole name right on a piece of paper. Everyone else always just wrote the minor or the child or left it blank. He set the notice down. "She wants me because I'm worth something to her. That's what the whole name means. It's the only kind of respect her sort has, and it's the kind you have to watch the closest, because it's the kind that files you." He looked at Wednesday, put her in the book. Wednesday already had the book out. "First column, W. Grouse, deputy head," she said, writing. "Second column," she considered. "Wrote to a family to inform it she intends to steal its child and signed it. Third column, today's date. Fourth column." She made a small, precise mark, an open account, and looked up, and her flat, dark eyes had in them the particular clarity that came over her only when the world had been decent enough to hand her a specific person to hold responsible. Open, very open, openest thing in the book. The owl, having finished its second mouse, decided it liked the Addams kitchen a great deal better than the ministry, and did not leave, and was named by Pugsley within the hour Barnabas, and lived out a long and undisturbed life in the mansion's east tower, and never carried a message for Wilhelmina Grouse again. Far to the north, in the circular office, Dumbledore read Minerva's letter twice, and then a third time, and set it down and looked for a long while into the fire. She had found him. That was the headline, and it should have been simple good news, and it was not, because the rest of the letter was the longest reprimand Minerva McGonagall had ever committed to parchment, and every line of it was just. The child was alive. The child was well. The child was, in the plain black ink of a woman who did not exaggerate, thriving, grown, clever, confident, loved past all reasonable expectation by a family so far outside the ordinary run of things that Minerva had filled half a page trying to describe them and given up. The child did not want rescuing. The child, Minerva wrote, did not need anything the wizarding world had to offer except an apology and a choice, and she strongly advised that Albus arrive with both, in that order, and leave the greater good in Scotland where it belonged. Dumbledore turned the still silver instrument over in his fingers. There was a version of this, and he could see it clearly, in which he asserted his authority. He was the child's magical guardian in all but the paperwork the Dursleys had signed. He held keys the child did not know existed, to vaults and to a school and to a destiny. He could arrive with the whole weight of the ministry and the law and the prophecy behind him, and simply take the child back into the world that had a use for him, and tell himself, as he had told himself before, that it was for the greater good, and be, as he had been before, partly right, which is the most dangerous thing a person can be. And there was the other version, which Minerva was demanding, and which required him to do the thing he had spent a century becoming too clever to do, which was to walk up to a door with empty hands and ask. He thought about a smiling boy in a hearse. He thought about 10 years of a silver instrument turning over a cupboard. He thought about Lily Potter, who had died to give her son a choice, and about how thoroughly he had spent that choice on the child's behalf and called it protection. "Fawkes," he said at last to the Phoenix, "we are going to go and meet the Addams family, and we are going to bring McGonagall, who does not trust me at the moment and is right not to, and we are going to bring no threats and no writs and no destiny." He stood, and the firelight caught the half-moon spectacles and the tired, ancient eyes behind them. "We are going to bring an apology and a letter and a choice, and we are going to let the child make it, and I am going to stand there while he makes it and accept whatever he decides, because I have earned nothing better, and he has earned nothing less." He crossed to the window, where the Scottish night lay black and clean over the mountains. "Though I confess, old friend, I should like to know what manner of people can take the most watched child in Britain, lose him under our very instruments for 2 years, and hand him back to us grown and glad, whatever they are." He almost smiled. "I rather suspect they are exactly what he needed, and that history will judge them kinder than it judges me." Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. They come for the boy who lived. They came up the drive on the last afternoon of August, 3 of them, in the slanting gold light that the Addams garden did its best to spoil, and the house watched them come the way it watched everything, which is to say with interest and appetite and impeccable manners. Dumbledore led. He walked with the unhurried ease of a man who has decided a thing and made his peace with it, in robes the deep blue of a bruise, his long silver beard catching the light, and he looked up at the mansion as he came, at the leaning headstones and the dead willow and the great cracked window shaped like a tired eye. And something in his ancient face did a complicated thing that was not quite a smile and not quite an apology, and was, in fact, recognition. The recognition of a man who has spent his life among the strange, greeting a house stranger than himself. McGonagall walked at his left, upright and grim, having warned him at length and in detail on the walk up from the gate, and having been ignored in the particular gentle way that Albus Dumbledore ignored people, which was to agree with everything they said and change nothing. And on his right walked Wilhelmina Grouse. She was a narrow gray woman in a narrow gray suit, with a leather case under her arm and a face arranged into an expression of professional concern that had been applied like paint and did not go all the way down. She looked at the house and saw, where Dumbledore saw a kindred strangeness, only an irregularity, a thing improperly filed, a set of circumstances that would photograph badly in a report and therefore had to be corrected. She had brought forms. She had brought in the leather case the whole quiet machinery of the state, and she believed, as she had always believed, that there was no door in the world that the correct form could not open, and no family the correct form could not dissolve. McGonagall had spent the walk up the drive trying one last time to prepare them, and had found the task impossible, because there is no preparing a person for the Addams house, only surviving it and being changed. "Albus, I have seen this place," she had said low as they passed the leaning headstones. "I have sat under their willow and been read like a ledger by a 13-year-old and given tea in my own clan tartan. Whatever you're planning to say in there, have it and then have it again, and lead with the truth, because they smell everything else, and they are not impressed by any of the things that impress the Wizengamot." Dumbledore had said that he intended to lead with the truth, and had meant it, and McGonagall had believed him, and had still felt, as the great door came into view, the specific misgiving of a woman escorting two people she respected into a house she was not certain either of them would leave with their certainties intact. Grouse, walking on the other side, had heard none of it, or had heard it and filed it under superstition, because Grouse did not believe in houses that could not be dissolved, having never yet met one, and a person who has never met the exception is always the most confident in the room, right up until the moment the exception introduces itself. They reached the great front door, and it opened before they could knock, and Lurch filled the frame and looked down at them from his considerable height and groaned. "Good afternoon," said Dumbledore pleasantly, entirely unruffled, tipping his head back to meet the butler's eyes. "My name is Albus Dumbledore. My companions and I have come to call upon the Addams family and upon a young man of my acquaintance whom I have wronged and whom I hope to be permitted to see. We are expected, I think, though not, I suspect, welcome, which is a distinction I have learned to respect at my age." He inclined his head. "May we come in?" Lurch considered him. Then he stood aside and groaned again, the second groan, the one that meant the house had been given leave to have them, and the three representatives of the wizarding world stepped over the threshold of the Addams mansion, and the door closed behind them without anyone touching it, and Grouse noted that and wrote it down. They were shown to the parlor, where the family had arranged itself for receiving. It was a masterpiece of hospitality, which in that house was indistinguishable from a masterpiece of intimidation, and the two were held in such perfect balance that no guest could ever be certain which he was being offered. Morticia sat at the center of a long divan the color of a raven, serene, her hands folded, the candlelight worshipping her. Gomez stood at the mantel beneath a portrait of a scowling ancestor, a cigar unlit in his fingers, smiling with all his teeth. Grandmamma occupied a wing-backed chair with a plate of biscuits balanced on her knee, biscuits she had baked that morning, dark and dense and faintly moving. Fester loomed by the window. Pugsley sat on the floor with something mechanical and probably explosive in his lap. Thing rode the back of the divan behind Morticia's shoulder at rest, watching. And Harry stood beside Morticia, in a well-cut black coat, straight-backed and clear-eyed, and looked at the three people who had come to decide his future, and did not fold, and did not flinch, and did not go anywhere behind his own eyes, because he was not a stone anymore, and had not been for 2 years. He read the room the way Wednesday had taught him, before anyone said a word, because the reading was the true weapon, and the talking was only ever the ornament. The old man in blue was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, and his eyes went to Harry first and stayed longest, which meant an old debt, carried carefully, the private accounting of a person who had done a wrong thing for a reason he still half believed. The severe woman beside him held herself like someone who had lost an argument on the drive up and intended to win it later. And the gray woman with the case looked at nothing in the room at all except the exits and the seals on her own papers, which meant she had already decided how the afternoon would end and was merely waiting for everyone else to be told. Harry catalogued all of it and set it beside his own steadiness, and found that the steadiness held, and understood that this was the whole of what 2 years in the house had built in him. Not the magic, not the fencing, but this, the ability to stand in a room full of people deciding his fate and decide himself that he was not a fate but a person, and that the difference was his to enforce. Tea was brought by Thing on a silver tray, and the cups filled themselves, and the sugar tongs walked to each cup and asked, in a thin metallic voice, how many, and Grouse declined the tea, and Dumbledore accepted it with delight, and McGonagall accepted it because refusing seemed rude, and she had decided, somewhere on the drive up, that she would very much rather be rude to Albus than to these people. "Biscuit," said Grandmamma, thrusting the plate under Grouse's nose. The biscuits shifted uneasily on the china, edging away from the light. "Go on, dearie, I baked them this morning special when I heard we were having company. There's a bit of graveyard rosemary in them and a secret ingredient I'll never tell he, and they're ever so good for the digestion, or ever so bad I can never remember which. That's half the fun of a biscuit." She waggled the plate. One of the biscuits made a break for the edge and Thing caught it and put it back. "No, suit yourself." "More for the nice old man." Dumbledore took 2 and ate one with evident enjoyment, and declared it the finest biscuit he had eaten in a decade, and asked for the recipe, and Grandmamma looked at him with sudden and profound approval and said that he was the first guest in 40 years to ask, and that she liked him, and that she would be sorry if it came to poisoning him later, and she said it so warmly that it took Dumbledore a moment to be certain she had said it at all. Fester meanwhile had eaten his teacup, saucer and all, and was crunching it with the placid contentment of a man enjoying a familiar snack, and Grouse watched him do it and made a note in the leather case, and her hand, when she wrote, was not entirely steady. "You have a beautiful home," said Dumbledore, settling into the chair that had been left for him, taking in the parlor with frank pleasure. "I have lived a very long time and visited a great many strange houses, and I say without flattery that this is among the finest. It knows what it is. So few houses do, or people." He looked then at Harry, and the pleasure in his old face gave way to something graver and more careful. "And you must be Harry." "I am," said Harry. "Yes." Dumbledore was quiet a moment, taking him in, the height of him, the clear eyes, the straight spine, the absence of everything the file had led him to expect. "Look like your father, you have your mother's eyes. People will have told you that, and it will have meant nothing because they were strangers, and it is a cruel thing to hand a child a dead person's eyes and call it a gift." He set down his tea. "I am going to say something now, Harry, and I am going to say it before anything else, before the business these two have come for, because I have learned that if you do not say the true thing first, you will spend the whole conversation finding reasons not to say it at all." He folded his long hands. "My name is Albus Dumbledore, and 11 years ago I placed you on a doorstep in Surrey, in the November cold, with a letter, in the home of people I had been warned were cruel, and I did it on purpose, because I believed that the protection of your mother's blood was worth the cost of your childhood, and I told myself it was for the greater good, and I did not once in 10 years go to see whether the cost I had chosen to spend on your behalf was being spent the way I imagined. It was not. I know that now. I have come a very long way to say to your face that I was wrong, and that I am sorry, and that no purpose I served, no matter how great, was worth what I let be done to you. You owe me nothing. I owe you a debt I cannot pay. I wished you to hear that from me in this room, in front of the people who did for you the one thing I failed to do, before we speak of anything else at all." There was a silence in the parlor. Harry looked at the old man, the most powerful wizard of the age, who had left him on a doorstep and come back a decade later to say sorry to his face in front of the family that had wanted him, and he found, turning it over, that he believed him, and that the belief did not fix anything, and that the old man knew it did not, which was the only reason the apology was worth anything at all. "Thank you for saying it," Harry said. "You didn't have to. Most people wouldn't. The Dursleys never did." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "It doesn't give you anything back, you understand that. Saying sorry isn't a key. It doesn't open the door to the part where I do what you came for. It's just the truth, and I'm glad to have it, and it's separate from everything else." He glanced at Morticia, who gave him nothing but her steady presence, which was everything. "That's a thing I learned here, that an apology is a gift you give with no strings, or it isn't an apology, it's an invoice, which is yours." Dumbledore looked at the child he had failed, who had just in 2 sentences drawn a distinction that half the Wizengamot could not have drawn, and the old eyes shone. "A gift," he said, "with no strings. You have my word, and my word, whatever else may be said of me, has never yet been for sale." It was McGonagall who spoke next, and she spoke as she did everything plainly, without ornament, because she had decided that this family respected plainness, and she was in this correct. "Then let me tell you what we came to offer, Harry, before the Grey Woman tells you what she came to take, so that you may see the difference clearly, because there is one, and it matters." She sat forward. "You were born into a world you have never seen. Your mother and father belong to it. It has a school in it, the finest in Britain, where children like you learn to be what they are instead of hiding it. It has a heritage that is yours, a name that is honored, people, thousands of them, who have loved the idea of you since before you could walk. That is a real thing, and it is yours by right, and no one, not this office, not even Albus, can take it from you or give it to you, because it was always yours. We did not come to move you from one cupboard to another. We came, or I came, to tell you that a door has been standing open your whole life, in a world you were stolen from, and that you may walk through it or not, as you please, but that you should at least be told it is there." "That is fairly said, Minerva," said Morticia, "and I do not dispute a word of it. There is a world he came from, and it is his, and we have always known this day would bring it to our door." She turned her dark gaze to the visitors. "But you speak of what is his by right, and of the door standing open, and I notice that you speak of it as a claim, a heritage, a destiny, a place he is owed, and therefore, somewhere underneath the kindness, a place he is expected to fill. And I would ask you to consider, all of you, that a thing offered as a birthright and a thing offered as a gift are shaped very differently in the hand, though the words sound the same, and children can tell the two apart long before they have the language for it, because children spend their whole lives being handed the first and calling it the second." Dumbledore inclined his head slowly. "You are not wrong. And since we are speaking the true thing first in this room, I will speak mine, which is harder than Minerva's, and which I would have spared him if I could." His old face had gone grave. "There is a war coming back, Harry. It has not ended, only paused. The way a held breath is not the same as peace. The man who killed your parents is not gone, and one day he will not be paused, and there is a prophecy, an ugly, ancient, binding thing that names you in it. That is the part no door and no kindness can change. You have a role in what is coming, whether you accept the school or not, whether you love us or them, whether you ever forgive me or never do. I did not make it so. I only failed to protect you from it while I had the chance." He spread his long hands. "So I will not pretend the world has no claim on you. It does. The claim is written in prophecy and paid for in your mother's blood. But I have come to believe, sitting in this room, that a claim is not the same as ownership, and that the best answer to a destiny you did not choose is a life you did, and that a boy who is loved and armed and free will meet what is coming far better than a weapon kept old in the dark ever could. Which is a thing," he added quietly, "that I should have understood 11 years ago and did not, and a child in a cupboard paid for my slowness." The parlor was silent. Gomez, who had been quiet through all of it, which was itself remarkable, pushed off from the mantel and came to stand beside Harry and put a hand on his shoulder and looked at the three visitors with his brilliant, terrible warmth. "You speak of what is coming," Gomez said, as though it were the largest thing in the room. "It is not. I have buried more of what was coming than you have names for, and I will tell you the secret of it, which is that a war, a prophecy, a dark man with no soul, these are only weather, and weather is met by people who are not alone. You want to know how he will meet what comes. He will meet it the way our son summons a storm to save his brother from a swamp. He will meet it surrounded. That is the whole of our philosophy, and it is older than your school and truer than your prophecy. Nothing that is loved enough can be defeated, because to defeat it you must first get through everyone who loves it, and he smiled. We are a great many, and we do not tire, and we do not forgive, and we are, every one of us, standing behind him right now." Harry looked up at Gomez and around at Morticia, and at Grandmamma and Fester and Pugsley and Thing and Lurch and Wednesday, and then back at the three people who had come from the world he was owed, and he understood that he had sitting in this parlor the two things the cupboard had never let him have at once, which were a history and a home, and that he was being asked, gently by some and coldly by others, to choose between them, and that he did not intend to. "Thank you," Harry said to Dumbledore and McGonagall, and meant it, "for telling me the true thing first. All of you did, and that's more than the Dursleys managed in 8 years. He was quiet a moment, arranging it. "I'm not going to pretend the war isn't real or the prophecy or that I get to hand it back, but I've worked something out listening to you. You think I have to pick the world I came from or the family that came for me, owed or wanted, and I don't. Because a heritage isn't a place you have to go and live. It's a thing you carry, and I can carry mine from right here, from this house, as an Addams on my terms, and walk through your open door whenever I decide to and not 1 minute before." He looked at Dumbledore. "That's my answer to your gift, and it's yes and thank you and later. Now." His voice changed, cooled, sharpened, took on the register Wednesday had taught him on a rooftop with a spyglass, and he turned to the gray woman with the leather case. "That's the offer dealt with. Let's hear the theft. She's been waiting to talk since she came through the door, and she keeps touching her case. Let's have it out where we can all see it in the light." Wilhelmina Grouse had not built 19 years of titles by being rattled by children, and she was not rattled now, or told herself she was not, and she opened her leather case with the crisp efficiency of a woman who has the law on her side and knows the comfort of it. "Harry," she said, and her voice was warm, professionally warm, the warmth of a brochure. "I'm Wilhelmina Grouse from the Office for the Welfare and Guardianship of Magical Minors, and I want you to know first of all that everything I do for you, for your welfare. That's my whole job, looking after young people like you who have fallen through the cracks." She drew out a sheaf of parchment. "Now, I'm afraid the situation here is a little irregular, legally speaking. These people are very kind, I'm sure, but they aren't your guardians, not properly, not in the eyes of the law. The paperwork your aunt and uncle signed doesn't hold up, and the payments that were made were, well, they were never authorized, and the long and short of it is that at this moment, in the eyes of the ministry, you don't have a legal guardian at all, which means you're a ward of the state, which means, regrettably, that decisions about your future are the ministry's to make, for your protection. And I've come to make them." She laid the parchment on the low table, turned so Harry could see the seals. "It's all here," Grouse said gently. "A placement, a proper magical household, vetted, appropriate, safe, where you can be prepared for school and for your responsibilities, of which you have many more than you know. I understand this will be hard. You've grown attached. That's natural, and it does you credit. But attachment isn't the same as what's best, and my job is what's best, and I promise you, Harry, in a year you'll look back and understand that this was the kindest thing anyone ever did for you." The parlor was very quiet. The candles lined. It was Wednesday who moved. She had been standing in the shadow by the cold hearth, unremarked, and she came forward now into the candlelight, small and pale and precise, and she sat down in the chair directly across from Grouse, and she folded her hands, and she looked at the gray woman with the flat black attention that had unmade a truant officer and a transfigured witch, and she began, without heat, without hurry, to take her apart. "You said everything you do for him," Wednesday said. "That is the first lie, and it is the load-bearing one, so let us begin there. You do not know him, you have never met him. You could not have picked him out of a room an hour ago. You do not do anything for him. You do it for the file with his name on it, which is a different thing, and I am going to prove it in front of witnesses, using only your own words, which is the most elegant way and therefore my favorite." I don't think, Grouse began, that a child is really qualified to. You came with a placement already chosen, Wednesday continued, as though Grouse had not spoken, which was its own quiet violence. A specific household, vetted, named in the papers on that table. You chose it before you came. Before you had met him, before you had assessed his circumstances, before you had seen whether he was thriving or starving, you had already decided where he would go. That is not welfare. Welfare would arrive with questions. You arrived with a destination, which means the destination was the point and the child was the cargo. She tilted her head a precise number of degrees. So, who is in the household you chose? Whose home is it? And what do they or you gain by having the most famous child in Britain grateful and dependent under their roof, prepared, as you put it, for his responsibilities by people you selected? Answer carefully. My mother researches everyone who comes up the drive, and there is a folder on you in this house already, and I have read it, and I am giving you the chance to tell the truth before I tell it for you. Grouse's professional warmth had developed a crack. This is outrageous. I am a ministry official conducting a lawful review, and I will not be interrogated by a child, Wednesday finished. Yes, you keep almost saying it. It bothers you being read by a child because you have spent 19 years being the cleverest person in every room full of orphans, and orphans do not have families who research the people who come for them. But he does. That is the variable your forms did not contain. She leaned forward the smallest amount. You are not here to protect Harry. You are here because an unclaimed guardianship over the boy who lived is the single most valuable thing to cross a ministry desk in a decade, and you got to it first, and you mean to hold it, because whoever holds him holds everything he will one day be worth, which is why you came with a placement and not a question, and why your warmth goes exactly as deep as this table and no further. She reached into the folds of her dress and produced not the ledger but a second book, slimmer, and opened it to a marked page. My mother's research, since you have decided not to answer. In 19 years you have held guardianship at one time or another over 41 magical children. 6 of them came with property or titles or seats or vaults of interest, and all 6 of those were placed in households that later did business with your office. The other 35, the ones worth nothing, were placed once and never visited again. You do not review the poor ones. You have never once in 19 years traveled in person to assess a ward who was not worth something, and you got into a carriage this morning and came 300 miles yourself for Harry before you had so much as met him. She closed the slim book. The pattern is the confession, Ms. Grouse. It always is. A person is only ever the shape of the thing they do again and again when they believe no one is keeping the tally. Someone was keeping the tally. It is this family's oldest hobby. She sat back. That is what you are. Now the room has seen it. That was the whole of my purpose, and it is accomplished, and you may put your professional face back on, though it will fit worse now, the way a mask always does once everyone has seen behind it. Grouse looked around the parlor and understood too late that she had lost it, that the child in plates had turned every face in the room, and she did what her kind always did when the persuasion failed, which was to reach for the law, because the law did not require anyone to like her. Very well, she said, and her voice had shed its warmth entirely now, gone flat and gray and administrative. Let us dispense with the theatrics. I did not come to be liked. I came with an order. She drew a final document from the case, heavier than the others, sealed in black wax with the crest of the ministry, and she set it on the table with the flat finality of a card laid down to end a hand. This is a writ of protective custody, signed and sealed by the Office of Guardianship, effective immediately. It authorizes the removal of the minor Harry James Potter from any environment deemed irregular or unsafe into the care of the ministry, pending permanent placement. It does not require the consent of the current occupants. It does not require the consent of the minor. It requires only that I present it, which I have now done. She folded her hands. I am sorry it has come to this. I would have preferred you came willingly, Harry. It reflects better in the file. But one way or another, you are leaving with me this evening because the law says so, and the law does not care how kind these people have been, or how attached you have grown, or what a little girl thinks she has proven in a parlor. Get your things. The candles in the parlor flickered all at once like a door had opened somewhere in the house. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Dumbledore had gone very still in his chair, watching, saying nothing, and McGonagall had half risen with her mouth open to object, and Grouse sat with her writ on the table and her hands folded, secure in the one thing she had never once been wrong about, which was that in the end the form always won. And Harry Potter stepped forward past Morticia, past Wednesday, into the center of the parlor and picked the writ up off the table and read it, all of it, slowly in the candlelight while the whole room watched, and then he set it back down and looked at Wilhelmina Grouse and spoke in a voice that did not shake. No, he said. Grouse blinked. I don't think you understand. This isn't a... I understand it completely, said Harry. I read it. It's very well written. It says you can take me without my consent and without theirs, for my protection, into the care of the people who protected me for exactly 10 years by leaving me in a cupboard. I understand it, and I'm saying no. He was very calm, and the calm was the frightening part, because it was not the calm of a child who does not grasp the danger, but the calm of one who grasps it entirely and has decided anyway. I spent 8 years being moved around by people who'd already decided what I was for and never once asked me. The Dursleys decided, he decided. A nod at Dumbledore without heat. A prophecy I never got a vote and decided. And now you've come with a piece of paper that decides, and you want me to get my things, and you think the paper means I have to. But here's the thing about this house, Ms. Grouse, the thing that isn't in your file. He looked around at them, at Morticia and Gomez and Grandmamma and Fester and Pugsley, at Thing and at Lurch in the doorway and at Wednesday, and then back at the Grey Woman with her writ. In this house, nobody gets moved without their leave. That's the first rule. It's the only rule, really. All the others come out of it, and I'm not leaving. So your paper's going to have to find out what it's actually worth, which is what a thing is always worth when the person it's written about simply says no and means it and has a family standing behind him who mean it too. Harry, said Morticia, and she rose from the divan, and the temperature of the parlor dropped a degree, and the candle flame stood up straight and tall, has given you his answer. It is also ours. You are a guest in this house, Ms. Grouse, and you have abused the hospitality of a family that does not extend it lightly, and you have laid a paper on my table that proposes to take my son, and you have told him to get his things. She glided forward, and she was smiling now, the serene, terrible smile that Vernon Dursley had seen and never recovered from, and Grouse, who had faced down a great many desperate guardians in 19 years, felt something she had not felt in all that time, which was the specific cold of a person who has walked into the wrong house. I am going to give you one opportunity to pick that writ back up off my table and put it in your case and walk back down my drive and file whatever you like in your windowless office from a safe and permanent distance. 1. Because in this family we do not harm a guest, it is our single iron law, and I should so hate for you to be the one who finally makes us wonder why we keep it. Grouse looked around the parlor. She looked at the smiling man by the mantel and the ancient woman with the moving biscuits and the looming bald figure by the window, and the child on the floor cradling something that ticked, and the disembodied hand that had risen from the back of the divan and was, very slowly, flexing. She looked at Dumbledore, who had not moved and would not help her, and at McGonagall, who was looking at her with open contempt. And she looked last at Wednesday Addams, who had taken out a small black notebook and a stub of pencil, and was watching her with an expression of patient, terrible hope, the pencil poised over an open page, waiting, quite plainly, to see which choice Grouse would make, because one of them would require an entry and one of them would require a great deal more. Wilhelmina Grouse was a coward in the end, as bullies are, and she reached out with a hand that had begun to shake and took the writ back off the table. This isn't over, she said, standing, gathering her case, her voice unsteady. You can't refuse a ministry writ. There are consequences. I'll be back with enforcers, with orders if I have to, and no amount of theatrics is going to stand between the law and a ward of the state. You've made this so much worse for yourselves, and for you, Harry, so much worse. She backed toward the door, where Lurch had stepped aside with terrible courtesy to let her pass. You'll wish you'd come quietly. I never wish that, said Harry. That's the whole point. I'm done wishing that. Grouse fled. They heard her heels on the flags of the hall and the great door opening and closing, and after a moment, through the cracked window, the small gray figure of her hurrying down the drive in the last of the gold light, growing smaller, toward the gate and the road and whatever reinforcements she could rouse. Gomez watched her go with the bright anticipation of a man who has been told there will be more courses. She is coming back, he said, and rubbed his hands. With orders, Tish, did you hear her? Orders in our house. Fester, when did we last have orders? Never, said Fester with feeling, swallowing the last of the saucer. We've never had orders. Oh, this is a red-letter day. I'll need to get the west lawn ready. And the tar pit. Is the tar pit at temperature? Somebody check the tar pit. You will do nothing to the tar pit, said Morticia, though not, Harry noticed unkindly, until we know what she brings and how many, and until Harry has told us what he wishes done, because it is his siege and his choice, and we are only, all of us, the instruments of it. She looked at her son. That is not a small thing I am handing you, and I want you to feel the weight of it before you take it. When she comes back, there will be force, and there will be a moment where the force meets this family, and how that moment goes, whether they leave frightened or leave differently, that is yours to decide, and we will do exactly what you ask and not 1 degree more or less. You have been moved your whole life by people who never asked. We are asking. What do you want us to do with the Grey Woman and her orders, Harry, when they come up our drive to take you? Harry thought about it. He thought about the cupboard and the writ and the sole discretion and the placement chosen before anyone had met him, and the 19 years of orphans filed like cuts of meat, and he found that the answer, when it came, was not the answer the old Harry would have given, the one that let them win because losing was quieter. I want them to understand, he said slowly, that I'm not a thing that can be taken, not hurt. I don't want anyone hurt, not even her, because if we hurt her then she gets to be the victim and I get to be the dangerous freak they always said I was, and I won't hand her that. But I want her to come up that drive certain as she was today, that a paper beats a person, and I want her to leave knowing, all the way down where she keeps the truth she doesn't look at, that it doesn't, that there are things in the world her forms can't dissolve, us, me, this. He looked around at them. Can you do that, frighten her out of it forever without giving her a single mark to put in a report? There was a silence, and then Grandmama began softly to laugh, the delighted wheezing laugh of a craftsman handed the exact commission she was born for. Oh, he's good, she said. Oh, he's ours all right. No marks and no mercy, the hardest job there is, the connoisseur's job. She patted Harry's cheek with one gnarled hand. Leave it to us, Duck. We've been frightening people without laying a finger on them for 300 years. It's the family trade. You've just ordered the masterpiece. In the quiet after Grouse's flight, Dumbledore rose from his chair. Wednesday closed her notebook. She had not in the end made an entry, because the account she wanted to open was not yet ripe, but she had written a single word at the top of the fresh page, and Harry, close enough to see it, read it, and understood that it was not a name but a date, and that the date was tomorrow or the day after, whenever the Grey Woman came back with her orders, and that Wednesday had marked it the way you mark the square on a calendar you have been waiting all year to reach. When the family had said its piece, Dumbledore rose from his chair slowly, having watched the whole of it without a word, and looked at Harry for a long moment, and then he did a thing none of them expected, which was to bow deeply, the bow of one power to another, the bow a man gives when he has watched a child do the thing he himself came to do and do it better and without any help at all. She will come back, Dumbledore said quietly. That much is true. The writ is real, and her alarm is real, and frightened officials with the law behind them are among the most dangerous things this world produces, precisely because they believe themselves to be the safest. She will come back, and she will not come alone, and she will not come to ask. He looked around the parlor, at the family, at the house, at the candles standing tall. You have until she does to decide how you will meet her. I cannot stop her. My authority does not reach into her office, and after today it would not help you if it did. The old eyes moved to Harry, and there was something in them that was almost, in an old man who had spent a century being certain, wonder. But I find, having watched you this afternoon, that I am not afraid for you, which is a thing I have not been able to say since the night I left you on that step. Whatever comes up that drive, Harry Potter, I begin to suspect it is the one that ought to be afraid. He reached into his robes and drew out a single letter, thick, cream-colored, sealed with wax the color of old blood, addressed in emerald ink, and he held it out. This is yours. It has been yours since the day you were born. It is a place at a school, offered freely with no writ and no strings, to be accepted or declined entirely as you choose, on whatever terms you choose, whenever you choose, or never. I will leave it with you. It is the one thing I came to give that has no cost attached, and I should like, before the Grey Woman returns and makes everything a matter of force, for you to have received at least one thing from my world that was offered the way this family offers things, freely, because you are wanted, and for no other reason at all. Harry took the letter. It was heavy, and the emerald ink spelled his whole name correctly, and above the seal, where his address should have been, someone had written in the same green hand a line that had not been on any envelope the ministry had ever sent. T.O. Harry Potter, who is exactly where he belongs. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. Everyone who touched him grouse came back at dawn on the third day with 2 orders and a warrant, and she was not the most dangerous thing on the road that morning, though she believed she was, which was, in the end, the whole of her trouble. The family had spent 2 days getting ready, and getting ready in that house was itself a kind of festival. Fester had been on the west lawn since Tuesday, humming, doing incomprehensible things with lengths of fuse and buried drums, and a device he referred to only as the surprise. Pugsley had refreshed the trapdoors in the front hall and calibrated the swinging portcullis of iron spikes that the family kept in the entrance arch for occasions, and had never, to Harry's knowledge, actually needed. Grandmama had brewed all night, and the kitchen smelled of things that made your eyes water and your resolve waver, and she had decanted the results into an alarming rank of small bottles, and labeled each in a spidery hand with warnings like makes the drinker tell the truth for an hour, and makes the drinker believe he is a goose. Lurch had oiled every hinge in the house so that the doors would open and close in perfect, ominous silence. Thing had spent the 2 days scouting the approaches, and reported and scouted again, until he could have drawn the road and every ditch beside it from memory, which, being a hand, he in fact did in ink on the kitchen table. A small precise map that the family gathered around and studied and improved, marking the sightlines and the soft ground and the one place in the east tree line where a patient person might stand unseen, which Wednesday tapped with one finger and said nothing about, and which the family noted and left alone and watched. And Morticia had done nothing visible at all, which was the most frightening preparation of them all, because it meant she had done the kind of preparing that does not leave marks. The night before, Harry had gone up to the roof, because the roof was where the 2 of them went when a thing was too large to say indoors, and Wednesday was already there, sharpening something, because Wednesday was always already there. You're worried I'll be taken, Harry said. He sat down beside her on the cold slates. Below them the west lawn glowed faintly where Fester's work waited under the grass. I can see it. You've sharpened that same edge 4 times. You only do that when the arithmetic isn't coming out. The arithmetic comes out, said Wednesday. She did not stop sharpening. The gray woman is nothing. 2 oars are a morning's amusement. That is not the part I am sharpening against. She was quiet a moment, the whetstone hissing. There is another one. I have felt him for 2 days at the edge of the property, at the edge of the trees. He has not shown himself, which means he is patient, which means he is not here to file you, which means he is the dangerous one, and I do not yet have his name, and I dislike, more than I have words for, harming a name I have not first written down. She turned the blade to the moonlight and found it at last adequate. You should be afraid. I want that on the record. A sensible person would be afraid tonight. I know. Harry drew his knees up and looked out over the graveyard garden at the dead trees and the fog gathering in the low places. I keep waiting for it, the old thing, the cupboard thing where I make myself small and go somewhere behind my eyes and wait for it to be over. I've been waiting all day for it to come back, and it won't. He turned to her. That's the thing that's actually strange, Wednesday, not the magic. I could always sort of do the magic. The strange thing is that something's coming to take me tomorrow, something that killed my parents' whole world once, and I'm not going behind my eyes. Because behind my eyes used to be the only safe place I had, and now the safe place is out here. It's the house, it's the lot of you, it's you. He said it plainly, the way the house had taught him to say the true thing. I used to hide inside myself because there was nothing outside worth staying out for. Now there is, so I'm staying out. Whatever comes up that road tomorrow is going to have to deal with a version of me that isn't hiding, which has never once happened before, not in my whole life, and I have you to thank for it, so thank you. Wednesday set down the whetstone. She looked at him for a long moment in the moonlight, and something moved in her flat, dark face, some deep and permanent thing shifting a fraction of a degree, which from Wednesday was an avalanche. Do not thank me yet, she said. Thank me tomorrow when it is done and everyone who came for you has gone home worse than they arrived and you are still on this roof, still out here, still unhidden. Then you may thank me. She picked the whetstone back up. And you will note that I did not once tonight tell you that nothing would happen to you. I do not lie to you. It is the one courtesy I refuse no matter what it costs. Something will happen to you tomorrow. It is only that I will happen to it first. They sat on the roof until very late, not talking, and it was, Harry thought, the best possible way to spend the night before a war. They gathered at the great window in the gray before sunrise and watched the road, and Wednesday stood at Harry's shoulder with the black rose he had grown her threaded in her hair, and she had her ledger open in her hands, and she was, for Wednesday, very nearly content because a specific person was coming up the road to do a specific harm, and the account had been open 2 days, and accounts in Wednesday's philosophy existed to be closed. There, she said, 3 figures on the road where the fog lay thickest. The narrow gray shape of grouse in front, and behind her 2 taller figures in the plum-colored robes of ministry orers, moving with the loose readiness of people who hurt others for a living and have decided in advance that today will be routine. But Wednesday was not looking at the 3 on the road. She had turned her head a precise number of degrees to the tree line on the east side of the property where the fog was thinning, and where a 4th figure stood alone among the dead trees, unmoving, watching the house with the stillness of a thing that has been watching a long time. Mother, Wednesday said quietly, there is a 4th in the east trees. He did not come with the gray woman. He has been there since before dawn, and he is not looking at the house the way the orers look at the house. The orers look at it as a job. He looks at it the way I look at a name in my book. Her flat, dark eyes had narrowed. He is the real one. The gray woman is the noise. He is the knife under the noise. Morticia looked where her daughter looked and was still, and something moved far down beneath the still surface of her. Then we shall attend to the noise loudly, she said, so that the knife believes we have not seen it. Harry, she turned to her son. 2 things have come for you this morning, and only one of them came in a robe with a warrant. Stay between Wednesday and me and do exactly as you have practiced, and remember what you asked of us. No marks for the gray woman and her men. They are only doing a stupid thing for stupid reasons, and stupid people frightened out of a stupid thing go home and stay home. Her dark eyes went once to the east tree line and came back. The other one, the one in the trees, he is not here to file you. Him we will attend to differently, but you asked for no one to be hurt, and I gave you my word, and an Addams keeps her word even against her preferences, and I have preferences this morning I have not had in years. She almost smiled. So, we shall have to be clever instead of merely thorough. Fortunately, we are both. The gray woman reached the gate, and the gate opened for her because the house wanted her inside, and she took it for a victory, which was the first mistake of a morning that would be built entirely out of them. Harry Potter, Grouse called out, marching up the drive between her 2 oars, her voice pitched to Carrie, her confidence restored by 2 days and 2 wands, and a warrant sealed in the blackest wax the ministry stocked. I am here under a writ of protective custody, endorsed now by the Orer office to take you into ministry care. This is your final opportunity to come peacefully. These gentlemen are authorized to use force. Do not make them. She stopped at the foot of the front steps and looked up at the family arrayed at the top, and she permitted herself at last the smile she had been saving. You've had your fun. The law has arrived. Bring me the child. Which child? Said Gomez pleasantly from the top step in his shirt sleeves, a saber resting easy against his shoulder. We have several. We collect them. Pugsley, are you a ward of the state? Not yet, said Pugsley from somewhere above, cheerfully. You see the difficulty, said Gomez. The Potter boy, snapped Grouse. Don't be clever with me. Or Fitch, bring him out. The larger of the two Aurors, a heavy man with the flat eyes of someone who had stopped asking questions about his orders a long time ago, started up the steps and set one boot on the third step, which was the step Pugsley had spent Tuesday afternoon on, and the step opened. It was not a large drop. The family were not, whatever the neighbors believed, murderers, and the pit beneath the third step was lined with a deep and forgiving mattress of something that Fester had assured everyone was only mostly leeches. But it was a sudden and total drop, and Auror Fitch went down it with a bellow and a splash, and the step closed neatly over him, and from beneath the flagstones came the muffled, indignant, increasingly high-pitched sounds of a heavily armed man discovering the leeches were at least somewhat. There was a silence on the drive. Anyone else care to take a step? Gomez inquired warmly. What followed, the second Auror would later swear to a disciplinary panel, defied any account he was able to give without being invited to hand in his wand and rest. He tried to go around the steps, across the lawn, and the lawn was Fester's, and the lawn came alive under him in a series of contained and beautifully timed detonations that never once touched him and walked him backward across the grass like a man crossing a stream on stones that kept exploding, until he fetched up against the wrought iron fence, at which point the fence, which was also Pugsley's, folded itself gently around him into a sort of decorative cage, tastefully with finials. From the rose bed, the vines that Harry had been teaching for 2 years rose up with slow horticultural menace and relieved him of his wand, passing it hand over hand or thorn over thorn up to the terrace, where Thing received it and tucked it away with the air of a cloakroom attendant. Somewhere behind the house, a lion roared unhurried and did not appear, which was infinitely worse than if it had. The first Auror climbed out of the pit under the third step eventually, by a rope ladder Thing lowered to him with the solicitude of a lifeguard, and stood dripping on the drive picking leeches off his plum robes and looking at the caged and disarmed remains of his colleague and at the smiling family and at Harry who had not moved from the top step, and he did a swift and honest piece of professional arithmetic. The kind Aurors are trained in, which weighs the value of an objective against the cost of achieving it. And this morning, unusually, the arithmetic came out entirely unambiguous. Ma'am, he said to Grouse, wringing out a sleeve, I don't believe this placement is going to work out. Auror Fitch, you are under orders. I'm under orders to retrieve a child, ma'am, not to be eaten by the front garden, said Auror Fitch, with the flat dignity of a man who has been leeched into clarity. That step ate me. The lawn had opinions. There's a lion I can't see, which is worse than a lion I can, and the roses took my wand, and I want it noted that the roses were polite about it, which I found the most disturbing part. I fought werewolves, ma'am, I fought a lethifold. I have never once been made to feel like the rude one, and this family has managed it in under 3 minutes without breaking the law, and I'd like to go home. He looked up at the terrace and remarkably tipped his sodden head to Morticia. No offense meant, Mrs. You run a tidy defense. None taken, said Morticia graciously. You may collect your wand from the hand by the door. Do wring yourself out first, you'll drip on the flags, and Lurch has only just done them. And Wilhelmina Grouse stood alone at the foot of the steps, one Auror in a pit and one Auror in a fence, her warrant limp in her hand, and looked up at the smiling family and the calm boy in the house that had eaten her escort in under 2 minutes without leaving a single mark that would photograph, and felt the specific cold, the one from the parlor, the one she had spent 2 days telling herself she had imagined. This is obstruction, she said, and her voice had gone thin. This is assault on ministry officials. No one has been assaulted, said Morticia, gliding down the steps toward her, serene, unhurried, and Grouse backed away 1 step for every step Morticia took and did not know she was doing it. Count them. Your men are unharmed, wet and caged and relieved of their wands, and I dare say reconsidering their choice of profession, but unharmed entirely to the last hair, and that was not luck, Ms. Grouse. That was mercy, and mercy in this family is a great deal more expensive than harm, and we spent it on you deliberately, so that you would have nothing to write down. You came here believing that a paper about a person is stronger than the person. You are going to leave having learned that it is not, and you are going to leave with no wound to nurse and no victim to point to, only the memory, which you will never be able to file, of the morning a family took your law apart on its own front lawn and handed it back to you folded, and did not so much as raise its voice. She stopped very close now and looked down at the gray woman. That was to be the whole of your lesson. Go home, Wilhelmina, burn the writ. Review the poor children for once, the 35, they have waited 19 years. That was to be the whole of it. Was to be, Grouse repeated, and something in Morticia's phrasing reached even her. Yes, said Morticia, and her dark eyes lifted past Grouse to the east tree line where the fourth figure had begun at last to move. because you brought something worse than yourself up our road this morning and did not know it, and it has decided that the noise has gone on long enough." The man came out of the east trees walking, and he did not hurry, and the fog seemed to lean away from him. He was tall and gray-faced and hollow, dressed in the remains of good black robes gone ragged at the hems, and he had the look of a man who had been handsome once and had spent the years since burning it for fuel. There was a wand already in his hand, held low, and he crossed the lawn past the caged Aura without a glance past Grouse, who shrank from him, whom he did not appear to see, his pale eyes fixed on one thing only, which was the small, dark-haired boy at the top of the steps with the lightning scar. 10 years, the man said. His voice was soft and ruined. 10 years I have looked for you. They told me you had vanished. They told me the great Dumbledore had hidden you past all finding. And then this summer the whole of the north lit up with a child's magic, a storm raised out of a clear sky, and I knew it was you. No one else could burn that bright and not know to hide it. He stopped at the foot of the steps and tilted his hollow face up and smiled, and the smile was the worst thing that had come up the drive that morning by a distance. "My master is not dead, Potter. He waits. And I have spent everything I had, my name, my fortune, my face, staying alive long enough to bring him the one gift that will call him back whole. You, the child who unmade him." The wand rose. "You have grown. Good. He does so prefer them when they can understand what is happening to them." The family had gone still, not the still of fear. The other still, the deep one, the one that had come into the garden at Privet Drive 2 years ago when a small child said, "They call me freak." The stillness of a great many patient predators all deciding, at the same instant, the same thing. "Mordecai Vane," said Morticia, and her voice had lost every degree of its warmth, and the temperature of the whole lawn went with it. "We know you. We researched you the moment you stood in our trees. A Death Eater who survived his master by selling everyone who did not, and has spent a decade hunting a child to buy his way back into a grave he mistakes for a throne." She did not move. None of them moved. "You laid a plan to take my son, and a moment ago on my lawn you raised your wand at him. You have touched him, Mr. Vane, in the only way that matters, which is that you decided to. I want you to understand, in whatever time you have left to understand things, that this was the mistake. Not coming here was merely foolish. Raising your wand at Harry in this garden in front of this family." Her dark eyes were black and bottomless. "That was the end of you. It has already happened. You simply have not caught up to it yet." Vane laughed and swung his wand toward the top of the steps, toward Harry, and opened his ruined mouth to speak a word that was going to be the worst word he knew. He did not get to finish it. Because Harry Potter, who had stood between Wednesday and Morticia exactly as he had practiced, who had watched a hollow man cross the lawn promising to hand him to the thing that had murdered his mother, felt the enormous cracking open behind his ribs that he had felt in the swamp, the one that answered to the pitch of a thing about to be lost, except that this time it was not Pugsley about to be lost. It was all of them, the whole family, everyone who had wanted him. Standing on the steps behind him in the path of a killing word, and the thing that came up out of Harry was not a storm, it was a wall. The magic went out of him in a single silent concussion, not at Vane, but around the family, a dome of hard bright air that slammed into being over the steps as Vane's curse left his wand. And the curse, a bolt of sick green light, struck the dome and splashed against it and guttered and died, and the dome held humming, shot through with light, with Harry at its center and his whole family gathered inside it, safe, every one of them, shielded by a 10-year-old who had decided, in the cracking instant, that he was done letting things be taken. The inside of the shield was very quiet. That was the part Harry would remember. Outside it the morning went on, the honking and the roaring and the leeches and Fester's small delighted detonations. But inside the dome there was only the hum, and the smell of a storm that had not fallen, and his own family standing close around him in a light the color of a held breath, and Gomez with one hand flat against the shining wall from the inside, testing it, marveling, and Grandmama saying something Harry could not hear through the hum but could read on her lips, which was "Well, I never." And Wednesday, who had not flinched when the green light came, who had not moved to save herself at all, standing at his shoulder inside the dome with the biting rose in her hair, and looking not at the curse that had just died against the wall but at Harry, at the raised hand, at the thing he had become in the instant it mattered, with an expression that was as close to open as her face ever came. He held the wall up with something that did not feel like effort so much as refusal, the flat animal refusal of a creature that has finally understood it has something worth refusing for, and he understood, holding it, that he could have held it all day, that the size of it was the size of what stood behind him, and that a person with this much to protect is not, in the end, a weapon at all, but the opposite of one, which is a shelter. Vane stared at the dome. He had not, in 10 years of hunting, considered the possibility that the child might be the most dangerous thing on the lawn. "That," said Wednesday, "was our cue." She came down the steps while the dome still hummed, small and unhurried in her black dress with the biting rose in her hair, and she walked toward Mordecai Vane the way winter walks toward the end of autumn, without hurry, without doubt, without any possibility of being talked out of it. Vane rounded on her and threw a curse because he was a killer and it was his reflex, and the curse never reached her, because Thing intercepted it, or the vines did, or the air itself declined to carry it. The accounts of that morning never agreed, and Wednesday did not so much as break stride. She had been waiting 2 days. She had been waiting, in a sense, her whole cold life, for exactly this, for a specific person who had touched a specific thing that was hers, delivered to her lawn with a wand and a plan, and no idea at all what he had walked into. "My name is Wednesday Addams," she said, "and I am going to explain something to you, and I would like your full attention, which you are about to have a great deal of trouble giving me, because my brother has just noticed you threw a curse at me." She did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice. 2 years ago I found a boy hiding in a hydrangea bush in Surrey, waiting for the people who hurt him to finish hurting him because no one had ever come. I decided that day that no one would ever touch him again and live unmarked, and I keep a book, and I wrote a promise in it, and I have been waiting, with a patience you cannot imagine, for someone to be foolish enough to make me keep it. She stopped a few feet from him and looked up into his hollow face with her flat black eyes. "Thank you, truly. You have no idea how long I have wanted a reason." Behind her, the swamp began, very softly, to bubble. What happened to Mordecai Vane was witnessed by 2 Aurors, one ministry official, the deputy headmistress of Hogwarts, and Albus Dumbledore himself, who had arrived at the gate at the first concussion of Harry's magic and come up the drive at a dead run for a man of his years and stopped at the top of it, and elected not to interfere because he had learned 3 days ago in a parlor, when a thing was being handled by people better at it than he was. It was not, any of them agreed afterward, violent exactly. That was the part none of them could quite convey to the disciplinary panel. Wednesday did not touch him. No blade was drawn. No curse was cast at him by any Addams, because Harry had asked for no one to be hurt, and the family kept its word even now, even here, even against the very grain of the morning. What happened was that the ground, which was Pugsley's, and the plants, which were Harry's, and the ordnance, which was Fester's, and the swamp, which was the whole family's and older than any of them, all began in a slow and beautifully choreographed procession to disassemble Mordecai Vane's certainty that he was the hunter, and to introduce him, gently, one impossibility at a time, to the fact that he was, and had been since he first set foot on the property, the prey. The lawn opened and closed at his feet, hurting. The vines took his wand and then his cloak and then, delicately, his dignity. When he tried to run for the gate, the graveyard was in his way, and the headstones, which had leaned in conversational clusters his whole approach, were arranged now somehow into a maze that had not been there a moment before and had only one exit, and the exit was not the gate. When he tried to scream for help, Grandmamma uncorked one of her small bottles at 50 paces and let the breeze do the rest, and the scream came out of him, to his evident horror, as the honking of a goose, and he clapped both hands over his mouth and stared at the family with the whites showing all round his eyes, and honked. From the high windows the ancestral portraits had come to watch, leaning out of their frames, and they applauded him politely at intervals, the way an audience applauds a performer they have decided is doing rather well at being torn apart. Somewhere close now the lion paced, still unseen, its breath audible, its patience the loudest thing on the lawn. Fester's charges walked him, unharmed and shrieking and honking, across the grass in exactly the direction the family wished him to go, which was toward the tar pit, warmed to temperature at the garden's edge, over which Lurch had swung out a long iron arm, and from the iron arm hung a chain, and Thing fixed the chain with great courtesy to the back of Vane's collar, and hauled in Mordecai Vane, who had come to deliver the boy who lived to a waiting darkness. Found himself instead dangling by his collar over a pit of hot black tar, kicking, weeping, 10 years of hunting reduced in under 4 minutes to a small screaming man on a hook, while a girl in plaits stood at the pit's edge and watched him with the calm, complete, unhurried attention that was the closest thing to love she had. "I am not going to drop you," Wednesday told him, "because Harry asked that no one be hurt, and I keep my promises even when they cost me, which is what makes them worth keeping and what makes me worth fearing. So you get to live. That is the mark I am leaving on you, not a wound. Your whole life, all the rest of it, lived with the knowledge that you had the child in your sights on his own lawn, and that a family of what you would call monsters took you apart without a single spell and hung you over a pit and then let you go, because letting you go was more frightening than dropping you, and we knew it, and you know it now too." She leaned in the smallest degree. "You will tell your master, if he ever wakes, exactly what waits around Harry Potter now. You will be our message. That is your purpose, the only one you have left. Every dark thing that ever considers reaching for him is going to hear from you first what it costs. Go and be afraid for the rest of your life, Mr. Vane. It is the longest sentence I know how to give, and I am giving it to you as a gift, the way this family gives everything." She stepped back and nodded to Lurch. "Set him down on the far side where the Aurors can reach him. He is theirs now. He was never mine." I only wanted him to understand whose he wasn't. They handed Mordecai Vane to the Ministry Trust in Pugsley's fence work and babbling, and the two Aurors, one damp and leeched and one lately caged, took custody of the most wanted dark wizard of the decade with the dazed gratitude of men who have been saved a great deal of paperwork and possibly their lives, and found on the whole that they had lost their appetite for taking anything else off this particular property. Harry let the dome down. He did it slowly, the way you set down something heavy you have been holding a long time, and the bright humming wall thinned and faded and was gone, and the family stood on the steps in the ordinary morning light, unharmed all of them, and Harry stood at the center of where the shield had been with his knees not entirely steady, having discovered the size of the thing that lived in him, and the fact that it answered every time without fail to the single question of whether the people he loved were safe. Morticia reached him first. She did not exclaim. She put one cool hand against the side of his face and looked at him and said, "You shielded us, all of us. You put yourself in the center and the wall on the outside, which is the choice of a person who has understood at last that he is worth standing behind. She let that be true. Your mother did that once, Harry, for you, with her whole life. You have just done it for 8 people and a lion and lived and let it down again gently so no one was hurt, which is more than she was given the chance to do. She would be, I think, past all speaking." She took her hand away. "You may sit down now. Your legs have earned it. There is no one left to be brave for." Harry sat down on the top step of the house that had wanted him in the ordinary morning, and Wednesday sat down beside him, and neither of them said anything for a while, and Thing climbed into Harry's lap and patted his hand, and out on the lawn Fester was already cheerfully resetting the west field for next time. They came to him one by one, the family, in the way of a family after a thing has happened, not making a fuss of it, because making a fuss was the Dursley way and no one in this house had ever learned it. Gomez arrived first, of course, and pulled Harry up off the step and into a crushing embrace and held him at arm's length and looked at him with streaming eyes. "A shield," he said, hoarse. He raised a shield the size of a house over all of us at 10 years old with a killing curse already in the air. Do you know how many grown wizards can cast a corporeal shield against the unforgivable that finds you first? None, my boy. It cannot be done. It is in every book that it cannot be done. You did it because we were behind you and you decided the book was wrong. He kissed him on both cheeks. You are the finest thing this family has ever produced, and I include myself, and I am magnificent. Grandmama seized his face in both gnarled hands and turned it to the light and studied him with her wet black eyes, checking, as she always checked, and found him whole, and planted a whiskery kiss on his forehead over the scar. "Not a mark on him," she pronounced to the family with enormous satisfaction. "Not a scratch, not a bruise, not a singed hair. He spent a killing curse and half his magic, and there's not a mark on him, because the only marks this child was ever going to carry, he carried in from Surrey, and we have spent 2 years taking those off one at a time, and I'll not have some hollow man from a graveyard putting new ones on. Soup," she added decisively. "He needs soup. Everyone needs soup after a war. Lurch, the big pot." Pugsley came and sat down heavily on Harry's other side and bumped their shoulders together, brother to brother, and did not say anything for a moment, and then said, "I got pulled out of a swamp by you once, and today you put a wall around the whole family so nobody got pulled into anything. That's, I mean." He frowned, working at it, a boy reaching for a feeling bigger than his vocabulary. "That's the best lowering into things I ever saw, and it was a lifting out of things, which is harder, and I'm proud you're my brother, that's all. I practiced saying it while you were doing the wall. I wanted to get it right." "You got it right," said Harry. And Morticia stood a little apart and watched her son be gathered in by the family that had chosen him in a garden, and did not join the gathering, because a mother knows when a thing belongs to the others, and she looked instead at the east lawn where the tar pit steamed, and the message that had been Mordecai Vane was being loaded, babbling, into a ministry cart, and her serene face held something old and satisfied and absolute. The look of a woman who had promised a frightened child 2 years ago that no one would ever touch him again, and had that morning in front of witnesses made the promise true. Wilhelmina Grouse had not fled. That was the strange thing. She stood where Morticia had left her, at the foot of the steps, having watched the entire morning, the pit and the fence and the dome of light and the hollow man on the hook, and something in her narrow gray face had come apart and not gone back together the same way. "He would have killed him," she said to no one, to herself. "That man, Vane, he came to kill the child, or worse, and I brought Aurors up this road to fight the people who were the only thing standing between the child and that." She looked at the writ still crushed in her hand, at the blackest wax the ministry stalked. "I have been so certain for so long that a child was a set of claims, that the safest place for any of them was the correct shelf." Her voice had gone very quiet. "And the safest place in Britain for Harry Potter this morning was standing behind a family I came to dissolve." She looked up at Harry on the steps, small and spent and entirely alive. "I don't know how to file this." "Then don't," said Harry. "That's the whole thing, Ms. Grouse. Some things aren't a form, that's not a loophole, it's just true." He looked at her without triumph, which was its own mercy. "Go and review the 35, the ones worth nothing. They're worth everything, that's the joke, that's the thing your whole office got backwards. Every single one of them is worth crossing a county for. I know because I was one and somebody did. Wilhelmina Grouse looked at him for a long moment. Then she smoothed the crushed writ flat against her thigh once, and folded it precisely into halves and then quarters, and put it into her leather case, and closed the case and turned and walked back down the drive alone, past the caged orer and the leach pit and the tar and the whole impossible morning, and she did not look back, and she never came up that road again, and some months later, in a windowless office 3 floors underground, she began, without telling anyone why, to travel in person to assess the wards that no one had ever thought were worth the journey. Minerva McGonagall had come up the drive behind Dumbledore, arriving in time to see the last of it, the pit and the hook and the honking man loaded into the cart, and she stood now on the lawn with her cloak whipping and her mouth pressed flat, taking in the whole impossible morning, and when she spoke it was to Morticia, and it cost her something to say it, and she said it anyway because she was, underneath the severity, a fundamentally honest woman. "I have taught children for 40 years, McGonagall said. I have told myself all that time that the school was the safest place in Britain for a child like this one, that we did it better than anyone, and I have just watched a family with no wands and one lion do in a single morning what the whole Order of the Phoenix failed to do in a decade, which is keep this boy safe and let him grow while they did it." She looked at Harry on the step, wrapped in his family. "You have shamed us, madam. All of us, and I find I am grateful for it, which is not a sentence I expected to say before breakfast." She inclined her head the severe inch. "If he ever does come to my school, he will be the best defended child ever to walk through its doors, because he will arrive already knowing the one thing we have never managed to teach a single student in 1,000 years, that he is worth defending. You taught him that. We only ever taught them spells." "Spells," said Morticia not unkindly, "are what people reach for when they have run out of family. He will not run out. See that your school understands that, Minerva, before it makes any plans for him. He comes with conditions now. All of us are the conditions." At the gate, Dumbledore watched her go, and then turned back to look up at the family on the steps, and at Harry, and the ancient blue eyes were bright, and he inclined his head once, the way one inclines it to a thing that has exceeded every expectation one dared to bring to it. "I came here 3 days ago," he said, "to see whether the boy who lived was safe. I have my answer." He looked at the pit, and the fence, and the shield-scorched steps, and the small, spent boy at the center of a family that had closed around him like a hand closing into a fist. "I have never in my life been so glad to be so thoroughly unnecessary." Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The boy who chose Dumbledore came back one more time at the end of that week, alone, which was its own kind of courtesy, and he came not with a writ or a warrant or a delegation, but with a single scroll and a request to be received. And the family received him in the conservatory this time, among the plants that leaned toward Harry, because Morticia had decided he had earned the honor, and because the plants would tell her things about him that his face would not. The plants, for the record, adored the old wizard, which surprised everyone, including the plants. The flytrap by the door, which bit on principle, declined to bite him. The appetite vine, which had once tried to eat a tax assessor whole and been talked out of it only with difficulty, leaned toward Dumbledore with what could only be described as interest, and had to be spoken to. Even the orchid that had learned Harry's footstep turned its face to the visitor and held it there, and Morticia, watching this, revised her assessment of the man downward on the scale of threat and upward on the scale of worth, because her plants had never once been wrong about a person, having no reason to lie and no manners to get in the way of the truth. A man the carnivores refused to eat was a man with something clean in him, no matter how much the something clean had been buried under a century of strategy, and Morticia decided on the strength of her orchid's opinion to give him the whole of her attention, which she did not give lightly, and which the old wizard, to his credit, appeared to understand the value of. He sat in a wrought iron chair among the black orchids and the flytraps, an old man in plum robes with his hands folded on his knee, and he looked at Harry, who sat across from him, flanked by Morticia and Wednesday, and he came at last to the business he had spent a decade not doing properly. "I have voided the writ," Dumbledore said. "That was the first thing. Wilhelmina Grouse has been reassigned, at her own request, to the review of long-term placements, where by all accounts she is doing a great deal of good and frightening a great many foster families with the novelty of an actual inspection. Mordecai Vane is in a cell from which he will not emerge, babbling, they tell me, about a hand and a goose and a girl, and no one believes a word of it, which suits everyone. The ministry has been persuaded by me, and by a very stern letter from Minerva, and by 2 Aurors who would rather resign than come back here, that the guardianship of Harry Potter is settled, legally, permanently, and in this house." He drew the scroll from his robes and set it on the iron table. "That is the paper, filed, sealed, incontestable. You are their son in the eyes of my world and its law, as fully as you are in the eyes of this garden. I brought it myself because I wanted to be the one to put it in your hands, since I was the one who put you on a doorstep, and it seemed to me that a man should close his own wounds when he can." Morticia took up the scroll and read it, all of it, because she read everything that concerned her son, and when she had finished she inclined her head a fraction, which for Morticia was a treaty ratified. "It is in order," she said. "Thank you, Albus, you did not have to bring it yourself. That you did is noted, and in this family a thing that is noted is a thing that is remembered, which is the only currency we keep. There is the other matter," Dumbledore said and turned to Harry. "The school. My offer stands exactly as I left it, freely with no strings to be taken or not. But I have come to understand that you will not take it the way the others take it, and I have stopped wishing you would, and I have come instead to ask on what terms you might take it at all. Because I find, Harry, that I would very much like you to come to Hogwarts, not because the world needs you to, though it does, but because I have watched you for a week now, and I think you would be extraordinary, and I would like to be alive to see it, and a school is a poorer place for every extraordinary child it never gets to keep." Harry looked at the old man, and then at the scroll, and then at the family around him, and he did the thing the cupboard would never have permitted, which was to negotiate from strength as an equal, as a person who knew his own worth because it had been demonstrated to him daily for 2 years. "I'll come," Harry said, "on terms, and the terms aren't negotiable, they're just true, so I'll tell you what they are and you can decide if your school can live with them." He held up one hand and counted them off, and Wednesday, beside him, took out her notebook and wrote each one down as he said it, formalizing, witnessing as she witnessed everything that mattered. 1. I come as an Addams, that's my name now. Harry Addams or Harry Potter Addams if the paperwork's fussy, but Addams on the register, on the door of wherever I sleep, in the mouth of every teacher who calls on me. I spent 8 years being called things I didn't choose. I choose this one. "It's the whole point done," said Dumbledore. "It would be my honor to enroll Harry Addams. 2. I go home, not just for the summer, whenever I need to. There's a fire in the conservatory here that Grandmama says can be made to reach your school if she's cross enough, and I'll use it, and I'll come home for a night in the middle of term if I want to, and no one at your school is going to tell me I can't, because home isn't a holiday for me. It's the thing that keeps the rest of it standing." He looked at Morticia. "I lost a home once before I could remember it. I'm not going anywhere that thinks I have to lose this one to attend." Dumbledore was quiet a moment. "That is irregular," he said. "It is against a number of school rules that exist for good reasons." He inclined his head. "I will change the rules. There have been worse reasons to change a rule than a child who refuses to be homeless in order to be educated. Done." 3, said Harry, and here he glanced at Wednesday, and something passed between them. "This one isn't mine, it's hers. She's had it written for 2 years. Wednesday closed her own notebook and looked at Albus Dumbledore with the flat black gaze that had unmade a truant officer, a transfigured witch, a ministry deputy, and a Death Eater, and she delivered her single condition in the voice she reserved for the thing she meant most, which was to say without any inflection at all. "I keep a book," Wednesday said. "You have heard about the book. In it are the names of everyone who has ever harmed Harry and the record of what became of them, and there is always room. When he goes to your school, the book goes with him in his trunk, and I go with it as far as your gates, and I will visit by whatever means, announced or otherwise, and your wards will not keep me out because I will have studied them, and here is the condition, headmaster, the whole of it. Your school is very old and very large and full of children, and some children are cruel. It is the commonest thing there is, and the ones who are cruel will look at a small boy with a famous scar and a strange name, and they will think, as such children always think, that he is prey. She let that sit in the green light. He is not prey. He has not been prey since a hydrangea bush in Surrey. But they will not know that at first, and there will be a period of instruction, and I am telling you now so that you are not surprised. Anyone who harms him at your school answers to the book, not to the rules, not to the professors, to the book and to me, and I am always, always closer than I appear. See that it is understood. You need not post it. It will get around." There was a silence in the conservatory. A fly trap near Dumbledore's elbow closed slowly on nothing for emphasis. "Miss Addams," said Dumbledore gravely, "in 50 years of headmastership I have received many demands from the families of incoming students. Yours is the first that I believe I would be genuinely unwise to refuse." His ancient eyes were bright. "It is understood. And I will tell you privately that a school which has spent 1,000 years failing to protect its gentlest students from its cruelest ones could do a great deal worse than the knowledge, quietly circulated, that one of them is watched over by something the wards cannot stop. Consider it done. Consider it, in fact, welcome." It was at this point that the rest of the family, who had been listening from various points around the conservatory and in one case from inside a large urn, discovered that conditions were being set and elected to contribute. "He'll want a proper kitchen," said Grandmama, materializing from behind a fern. "I've seen what schools feed children, gruel and optimism. I'll be sending a hamper by Al every week, and I'll want it known that if I hear he's gone hungry once, one single time, I will come to your school in person and inspect your kitchens, and your cooks will never sleep soundly again, and neither, dearie, will you." She patted Dumbledore's knee. "It's meant kindly. Everything I do is meant kindly. That is what makes it frightening." "I'll be sending things," Pugsley announced. "By Owl, interesting things." Some of them will be alive and some of them will be the other thing, and your school will need to be relaxed about parcels. Barnabas already knows the way, he's been practicing. I should like, said Fester wistfully, to see the dungeons. I hear you have real ones, not for anything sinister. I simply collect the feeling of a good dungeon, and it would mean a very great deal to me. And there will be a fencing exhibition, Gomez declared, appearing in the doorway with two sabers, having apparently anticipated this exact moment for some time. Father and son on the school lawn before the whole assembled student body, so that everyone present understands from the very first week precisely whose son the new arrival is and precisely how enthusiastically that son is backed. I have been planning it for a year. I have a cape. Dumbledore looked from one Addams to the next, at the hamper threat and the live parcels and the dungeon connoisseur and the man with the cape, and something happened in his ancient face that had not happened there, by his own reckoning, in a great many decades, which was that Albus Dumbledore laughed helplessly all the way down. I accept every one of those conditions, he said, wiping his eyes. Every single one, the hamper, the parcels, the dungeon tour, the exhibition, the cape. I have run that school for 50 years, and it has been, I realize only now, listening to you, in dire and chronic need of precisely this. Send the owls, bring the cape, inspect the kitchens, madam, with my blessing they have needed it since the war. He shook his head. Do you know, I came up this hill dreading a battle, and I am leaving with a fencing exhibition to look forward to. I cannot remember the last time I was this thoroughly and this pleasantly defeated. He rose and gathered his robes and looked at the three of them, the pale mother and the black-plated girl and the child at their center who had grown from a doorstep into a person with terms. Then it is settled, and better settled than I dared hope. He will come to us when he is 11, as an Addams, keeping his home and his book and his fierce small guardian, and my world will meet the version of Harry Potter that this family built instead of the version I abandoned, and I begin to think that is the luckiest thing that has happened to my world in a very long time and the least deserved. He paused at the conservatory door and turned back, and for once the great strategist had nothing strategic in his face at all, only an old man's plain gladness. Lily would have liked it here, he said. That is not a thing I have the right to say, and I say it anyway because it is true and because you are old enough now to keep it. Your mother loved fiercely and laughed easily and had no patience at all for people who mistook rules for goodness. She would have taken one look at this house and this family and this garden that lanes toward you, and she would have known you were exactly where you belonged. I could not give you that knowledge myself. I gave it away on a doorstep. But they earned it back for you every day for 2 years, and I am glad past speaking that someone did. He bowed to the whole family deeply. Thank you for my student, thank you far more for your son. And he was gone, out through the leaning plants, and the front door opened and closed for him without a hand, and the Addams family was, at last, alone with the settled fact of Harry. They made it official that night in the Addams way, which no ministry could have filed and no court could have recognized, and which was, of the two ceremonies, by an immeasurable distance the more binding. They gathered after dark in the graveyard garden, all of them, by the light of black candles Fester had set among the leaning stones, and Lurch dug a grave. It was a small grave and empty, and Harry watched him dig it and did not understand, until Morticia put a folded bundle into his hands, and he opened it, and found inside the enormous gray jumper that had belonged to Dudley, the one he had been wearing in the hydrangea bush the day they found him, laundered and folded and kept all this time for exactly this. We keep everything, Morticia said. It is the family failing and the family strength. We do not throw away, we bury, which is different because a buried thing is honored and a discarded thing is only lost. This is the last of the child who lived in a cupboard. He was brave and he was alone and he made himself small so that he could survive people who should have made themselves smaller, and he did survive, all the way to a garden, which is the only reason any of us have you at all. So we are not going to throw him away. We are going to bury him with honor here among the family where he can rest because he has earned his rest and where you can visit him whenever you need to remember how far you have come. She put a hand on Harry's shoulder. Say goodbye to him, Harry, kindly. He got you here. Then put him in the ground and let him stop running and come out the other side as the person he was running toward the whole time. Harry knelt at the edge of the small grave with the gray jumper in his hands, and he looked at it, the rolled cuffs, the stretched neck, the thing he had hidden inside for years, and he found that he did have something to say to the child who had worn it. You can stop now, Harry told the jumper quietly, and his voice was steady because 2 years of open doors had made it so. You did it, you got us out. You held on in the dark long enough for someone to come, even though you didn't think anyone would, and someone did, and it's all right now. You can put it down, I've got it from here. He folded the jumper once more and laid it in the grave and took a handful of the cold black earth and let it fall, and the family one by one each let fall their own, Gomez and Grandmamma and Fester and Pugsley and Lurch and Thing and Morticia, and last Wednesday who dropped her handful and then after a moment reached into her hair and drew out one petal of the biting black rose and let that fall too, which was from Wednesday the largest offering in the world. And when the small grave was filled, Lurch set at its head a stone that Grandmama had carved, and the stone said only, "Here lies the orphan. He is survived by his family." They stood around it a while in the candlelight, the whole family, in the particular silence they kept for their dead, which was not a mournful silence but a full one, a silence with room in it. Grandmama, who had buried more of the family than anyone living, laid a hand on the little stone, and told the orphan beneath it that he had done well, that he had held the line in the dark longer than most grown men could have managed, and that he could rest now among people who knew the worth of a thing that refuses to die when it is convenient. Fester set a single black firework by the stone, unlit, a promise to come back and set it off on the anniversary every year, so the orphan would know he was remembered loudly. Pugsley, who did not have the words, put his own small guillotine, the crayon Constitution one, at the foot of the grave, because it was the most precious thing he owned, and the dead, in Pugsley's theology, should have the best of what you had, not the leftovers. And Harry stood at the edge of the grave he had just filled with his own hands, burying the child he had been so that the child he was becoming could stop running, and he did not feel, as he had half expected to feel, that he was losing something. He felt the opposite. He felt the way you feel when you set down a weight you have carried so long you forgot it was separate from you, and discover that your own body, unburdened, is lighter and stronger and entirely your own. The orphan was safe now in the ground among family. He would never be cold again, or hungry, or alone in a cupboard listening to a party overhead. Harry had seen to it. It was the last thing he owed the child who had gotten him here, and he had paid it in full, with honor, in a garden surrounded, and now he was free. Then they went inside, and Morticia took Harry to the long wall of the entrance hall, the one hung with the handprints of Addamses down the generations, hundreds of them, pressed in dark wax or paint, or in the older cases, other media, each one a member of the family who had at some point been welcomed home for good. She gave him a shallow dish of ink the color of a bruise, and she did not do it for him because it was his to do, and Harry pressed his own hand into the ink and then flat against the cold plaster of the wall at a height between Wednesday's handprint and Pugsley's, exactly where a brother's would go, and held it there and took it away, and left on the wall of the family, in the place that was his, the mark that said, more permanently than any scroll Dumbledore could file, that Harry belonged here now. Forever on purpose, and had put himself there with his own hand. He stood back and looked at it, his print among the hundreds, small and dark and permanent, next to Wednesday's and above Pugsley's, and Morticia stood beside him and looked at it too. "Every hand on this wall belonged to someone who was welcomed home for good," she said. "Some of them were born to us, more than you would think we're not. We are not, in the end, a family of blood, Harry, whatever the wizards and their prophecies believe. We are a family of choice, which is the only kind that holds, because blood is an accident and choice is a vow. Every print here is a vow. Yours is the newest. It will not be the last, because that is what a family like ours does. It keeps finding the ones no one wanted and bringing them home and giving them a wall to put their hand on, world without end." She touched the fresh print with one cool fingertip, careful of the drying ink. "But it is tonight the most precious to me, because I remember the child in the garden who owned nothing and let us take nothing and stood on a doorstep and said there is nothing in there that is mine. Look at you now. You have a wall. You have a name. You have a grave for the old sorrow and a family for everything that comes after, and a whole house that does not lock, and you built none of it out of things you were given. You built it out of things you chose. That is the difference between an orphan and an heir, and you crossed it tonight with a handful of ink entirely by yourself." Gomez wept and did not apologize for it, and raised a glass of something that smoked and made a toast. "To Harry Addams," he said, his voice ringing off the antlers and the ancestors, "who was found in a garden and chose a family, and shielded us with his own body and his own strange bright soul, and buried his sorrow with honor and put his hand on our wall. To the finest son a family ever went looking for and did not know it, to our boy." He lifted the glass higher. "May his enemies be many and his family be nearer. May he never again make himself small, and may every dark thing that ever reaches for him meet first the whole of us and learn." The family lifted their glasses. "Welcome home, my son. You were always going to end up here. It only took the world 8 years to get out of the way." And Harry stood in the great hall of the house that had wanted him, his handprint drying on the family wall, his sorrow buried with honor in the garden, his name his own at last, surrounded by every strange and terrible and loving face that had chosen him. And he felt the thing he had spent his whole life being told he would never have, the thing the cupboard had been built to keep out, and for once he let himself name it out loud plainly, because in this house you were allowed to say the true thing. "I'm happy," Harry said. It came out slightly astonished, like a man reporting a fact he had just discovered about the weather. "That's the word, isn't it? I don't think I've ever actually said it before. That's it. That's the whole word. I'm home." "Yes," said Morticia, and touched his hair over the scar as she had in a garden in Surrey 2 years and a whole life ago. "You are, and you may say it as often as you like. There is no wrong amount." And then the family did the thing families do when a thing has been made true, and there is nothing left to fight about, which is to make an unreasonable amount of noise about it. Grandmama produced the soup, the great pot of it, 40 years deep and never once washed, and served it out in the hall with a ladle, standing on a chair to reach the bowls, cackling, telling everyone who would listen that she had known the day she took the child's chin in a Surrey garden that he was one of theirs, magic to the marrow, and that she had never once been wrong about a chin in 300 years and did not intend to start. Lurch went to the piano and played, and it was not a dirge tonight, or not only a dirge, it had something almost like a waltz buried in the bottom of it, and Gomez swept Morticia out into the middle of the hall and they danced, the two of them, the way they danced, which was less like dancing than like two flames agreeing to burn in the same direction, and the ancestors leaned out of their portraits to watch, and one or two of them wept into their painted ruffs. Fester set off fireworks over the graveyard. They were, in the Addams tradition, black fireworks, which sounds impossible and was not, great blooming absences that opened over the dead trees and hung there like holes punched in the night sky. And each one at its heart held a small private flare of deep and secret color, red and green and violet, so that you had to watch closely and want it to see the beauty in the dark, which was, Harry thought, watching them from the steps with a bowl of impossible soup warming his hands. The whole of this family in a single image, darkness on the outside, and if you came close and were welcome, a hidden and deliberate splendor at the center of every terrible thing. Pugsley sat with him on the steps and named each firework as it went up, having it develop, named them all in advance, and lowered a sausage into the soup pot on a string to see if the soup would take it, which it did, gratefully, and Thing conducted the fireworks from the roofline like a tiny five-fingered maestro. And Kitty Cat, who had spent the day being terrifying, lay in the hall by the fire with his great head on his paws and let Harry, on his way past, scratch him once behind the ear. Which was, from Kitty Cat, a knighthood. Wednesday did not dance because Wednesday did not dance, but she stood at the edge of the hall with a glass of something dark and watched the whole loud macabre celebration with the particular attention she gave to things she intended to remember exactly. And when Harry came and stood beside her, she did not look at him, because looking at people was a thing she rationed, but she said into the noise meant only for him, "This is the correct amount of celebration. I have attended many, most are too small. Ours is the right size for the occasion, which is that a person who was told he was nothing has just carved his name into 300 years of us and shielded the lot from a killing curse and buried his grief with military honors, all before his 10th birthday party has even been planned." She sipped the dark thing. "I have decided to allow myself to be on this one night, and against my general policy, please, do not tell the others, they will make it a thing." She let a beat pass, "But I wanted you to know that under the ledger and the knives and the general froideur on this specific night in this specific hall, watching this specific family make a great deal of noise about you, I am, in the technical and rarely invoked sense of the word, pleased. That is the largest thing I have ever said out loud. I will deny it tomorrow. Tonight it stands." And she touched her glass to his, once a small dark chime under the piano and the fireworks, and went back to watching, and Harry stood beside her and watched too, and it was, of everything that happened that night, the moment he would keep the longest. Harry moved through all of it, the soup and the piano and the black fireworks and the dancing and the noise, and he did the arithmetic he could not help doing, the old cupboard arithmetic of exits and dangers and how fast can I disappear, and he found, running it, that the numbers had all changed, that there was no exit he wanted, no danger in the room, nowhere he would rather disappear to than the exact center of the loudest, strangest, most macabre party ever thrown, because it had been thrown for him. On purpose, by people who had gone looking for a child no one wanted and brought him home and buried his sorrow with honor and put his hand on their wall. He stood in the middle of his own welcome and let it be loud, and did not go anywhere behind his eyes, because there was nowhere behind his eyes that was better than here. Word of it reached the wider world the way such words do, sideways, in whispers, growing legs. In a pub in Diagon Alley, a wizard leaned across his tankard and told another wizard, in the low, delighted voice reserved for the best gossip, that the Potter boy had been found. Not dead, not hidden by Dumbledore in some fortress after all. Adopted, if you please, by a family so strange that 2 Aurors had put in for reassignment rather than go back to the house, and there was a whole tale attached, a ministry writ torn up on a front lawn, a Death Eater, Vane himself, taken alive and raving by people who did not appear to own a single wand between them, and a shield, they said, a shield the size of a house, raised against a killing curse by a 10-year-old who had never been to school. The second wizard said that could not be true, that no child could do such a thing, that it was against everything in the books. The first wizard shrugged and drank and said that was rather the point, wasn't it, that the books had been written before anyone had met this particular child, and that a new chapter appeared to be getting itself written whether the books liked it or not. In the offices of the Daily Prophet, an editor killed 3 different headlines about the boy who lived and could not settle on a 4th, because none of the words she had spent a decade using fit anymore. Tragic did not fit, lost did not fit, rescued certainly did not fit, the accounts being unanimous that the child had rescued everyone else. In the end, she ran no headline at all, and told her staff they would wait until the child himself decided who he was, because she had a feeling, an editor's feeling, that whatever he decided would be more interesting than anything she could invent, and that it would be wise, for once, to let the subject write the story. And in the drawing rooms of older families, the ones who kept the long grudges and the longer memories, the name Addams was spoken and turned over and set down again with care, because those families had records too, and the records on the Addamses went back a very long way and were, without exception, cautionary. The consensus, arrived at over sherry in a dozen separate rooms, was that whatever any of them had once planned to do about the Potter heir, it would be prudent now to plan something else, or better yet nothing at all, because Harry Potter was no longer a loose thing to be gathered but a thing with a family around it, and not a family anyone sensible went near, and the world, which had spent 10 years imagining it might one day tell Harry Potter what he was for, began, slowly, room by room, to understand that it had missed its chance, and that he had already been told every day for 2 years by people who had decided the answer was ours and safe and free. Some nights after, when the celebrations had long wound down and the house had gone quiet, Harry found Wednesday on the roof, because the roof was where they went, and he sat down beside her on the cold slates, and for a while they watched the graveyard garden below, where the fresh small graves sat among the old ones and the black candles had burned down to nothing. "You put a rose petal in the grave," Harry said. "I did not," said Wednesday. "I watched you do it. You watched a trick of the candlelight, and you will tell no one, or I will deny it, and I am a more convincing liar than you are a witness." She was quiet a moment, her plate stark against the moon. "But if I had done such a thing, which I did not, it would have been because the orphan in that grave kept you alive long enough for me to find you, and I owe him a debt I can never repay, because he is dead now honorably, and the dead are the only creditors who never come to collect, which makes them the only safe ones to owe. If I had put a petal in his grave, it would have been a receipt for a debt paid in full, to a boy I never met, who did the one thing that mattered, which was to hold on." Harry looked at her, this fierce strange girl who had appointed herself his guardian at the edge of a hydrangea bush and never once wavered, who had studied a family's worth of enemies and hung a Death Eater over a tar pit and demanded terms of the greatest wizard alive, all for him, all without ever once saying a soft word, because the soft words were not where she kept it. "I'm going to go away to school in a year," Harry said. "You'll still be here, that's the part I don't like. The rest of it I can do, that part I don't want to." "I have considered it," Wednesday said. "It is the single flaw in an otherwise acceptable arrangement, and I have spent 2 weeks on the problem, and I have a solution which I will now tell you, and you will not argue with it, because I have already decided." She turned and looked at him, level and absolute in the moonlight. "You will go to the school. You will be extraordinary because you are, and because I will not tolerate a guardian's charge who is merely adequate, adequacy being a thing I reserve for people I like and do not love. And I will finish my own education here at home at speed, because I am cleverer than any curriculum, and the year after you begin I will follow you to that school, and I will be sorted into whatever house will have me, and I will be near you again, and the book and I will be exactly as close as we have always been, which is closer than anyone reaching for you will ever believe possible until it is far too late." She held his gaze. "That is the plan, a year apart, not forever. I do not do forever in the direction of loss, only in the direction of keeping. And I am keeping you, Harry Addams, all the rest of both our lives, whether you are down the hall or down a country, because I decided it in a bush in Surrey, and I have told you, I do not decide things twice." Harry looked at her for a long moment in the moonlight, and then he did the thing he had learned to do in this house, the thing the cupboard had trained out of him and the family had trained back in, which was to reach out toward another person without bracing for the flinch, and he put his hand over her cold hand where it rested on the slates once briefly, and she let him, which from Wednesday was an embrace and a vow and a whole language spoken at once. "Okay," Harry said. "A year. I can do a year if the book's coming after." "The book is always coming after," said Wednesday. "That is the entire comfort of the book." They were quiet a while. Below them a night bird called across the graveyard, and the fog came up in the low places the way it always did. "What house do you think they'll put you in?" Harry said. "At the school there are 4. Wednesday considered the question with her usual gravity. "It does not matter," she said. "I will be in whichever one puts me nearest you, and if the hat that decides such things disagrees with me, I will explain to the hat that it is mistaken, and the hat, being at least 400 years old, will have the sense to listen, because old things know better than to argue with a girl who has already decided." She turned the black rose petal over once in her fingers. The one she had not, she insisted, put in a grave. "I have thought about the year apart more than I have told you, because telling you would have made it real before it needed to be. I do not like being parted from a thing I keep. It offends my sense of order. But I have decided that a year is a tolerable price, because a year is a debt with an end on it, and the things I cannot bear are only the debts with no end, the ones like the cupboard, that go on and on because no one comes." She looked at him. "Someone came for you, I came. And now the arithmetic runs the other way for the rest of both our lives, and 1 year at the front of it, with owls and a fire that reaches your school and a book in your trunk, is not a loss. It is only a distance. I do distance. I do not do loss in your direction ever again. You know, Harry said, for someone who never says a soft word, you say the softest things I've ever heard. You just bury them so deep in the hard ones that a person has to dig. Yes, said Wednesday, entirely unbothered. It is called security. Anything worth keeping is kept behind something that bites. You gave me a rose built on exactly that principle. You understand me better than you pretend, Harry Addams, which is the only reason I permit you to be sentimental at me on a roof at this hour, a thing I would end anyone else for attempting. She almost very nearly did not smile. Do not make a habit of it, or do. I find, to my considerable inconvenience, that I do not mind either way. They sat on the roof until the moon went down, the orphan and the girl of woe, the found child and his fierce keeper, two small dark figures on the slates of a house that had wanted them both, over a garden full of honored dead and one fresh honored grave, in a country that would spend the next year slowly, disbelievingly discovering that its lost and famous savior had not been rescued into their world at all, but had chosen instead to be an Addams, and to be loved, and to be dangerous, and to be entirely, permanently unafraid. And far to the south, in a tidy house on a tidy street, a plastic trophy stood on a mantel over an empty cupboard, gathering dust. And far to the north, in a circular office, an old man looked at a silver instrument he had not been able to make turn again and had at last stopped trying to, and found that he did not mind, because the thing it had measured was safe now, safer than any ward he had ever built, kept by a family stranger and fiercer and kinder than anything in all his long collection of strange and fierce and kind. And in a great dark house on a hill that had no business being where it was, a boy who had once been told he was not worth wanting slept behind a door that did not lock, in a room that was his, in a family that was his, with his name on the wall and his sorrow at peace in the garden and his guardian across the hall with one ear kept back for him in the dark, exactly where he belonged, and always from that night on exactly where he chose. Chapter 7 End.